Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326 Exploration. Viserys disappeared from the tent quietly. The people in the tent had no idea that someone had been hiding in the dark and observing them for a long time. He had searched everything in the house and then left quietly. It was dark now, and it might have been past the hour of the bat, but it was still a long time before dawn, and the sky had not yet turned pale. Many people in the camp were awakened by what had just happened, and they were asking each other about something. Since Viserys had come out, he went to take a look at the scene. The lights here were bright, with several torches lit, and many people surrounded them in 3 layers inside and outside. Viserys appeared without attracting any attention, and then he pushed through the crowd and squeezed through to the front. What happened? He even pretended to be ignorant. The person is dead, beaten to death alive, and then dragged away for a long distance. A middle-aged mercenary who looked to be in his 30s or 40s beside Viserys spoke with a straw stick in his mouth. I think the wound looks a bit like a wolf's tooth, but... The middle-aged mercenary's face was a little gloomy, and he even looked a little scared under the bright firelight. Then he stopped talking, sighed, and turned away. Viserys was still waiting for him to continue talking, but he didn't expect him to suddenly shut up, and his face became very ugly, and then he turned away. The silver-haired young man frowned slightly, then retracted his gaze, and looked at the body that was bitten to death. The body looked a little hideous, with blood and flesh on the upper body and mud on the lower body. It seemed that the monster bit his neck and dragged his body to run, but it didn't run too far and was caught up by the mercenaries. Then the monster decisively gave up its prey and turned to flee into the woods, disappearing without a trace. What kind of monster is this? While Viserys was carefully observing the body, the mercenaries around were shouting loudly, but it was obvious that they were all using their voices to cover up their fear. After all, everyone knows the dangers on the Valyrian continent. Such a monster that came and went without a trace suddenly attacked the camp, killing a good fighter without any resistance, which aroused the fear in everyone's heart. This monster can easily kill this person, so can it easily kill me? There were no torches in the camp. It was dark, and the few torches were in the hands of the mercenaries on duty at night. Will a monster sneak into the camp, take advantage of me in my sleep and almost bite off my head like this poor guy? Although the human neck is a relatively fragile part of the body, the bite force of this monster is still very amazing, and it directly bit off his head. It is even stronger than some beasts such as tigers, lions and black bears, and the speed of the monster is also amazing, abandoning the prey and running fast. People around were clamoring, and Viserys stood up and didn't continue to watch. He didn't worry that he would be in danger when he was attacked by such a monster. Such a monster couldn't kill him, so Viserys was relatively not so afraid. Then the silver-haired young man squeezed out of the crowd again and returned to his tent. With a swish, Viserys opened the curtain, and Maya was waiting for him inside. Back? The red-haired girl asked. She didn't ask Viserys where he had been. Everyone has their own secrets. She knew this since the day she became a sellsword. Yeah. Viserys nodded slightly. He was willing to stay with Maya for this reason. Maya was not as delicate as other girls, but rather very capable and decisive. She didn't need anyone's protection because she could protect herself. Even to say something unpleasant, Viserys felt that Maya didn't look like a girl, because no girl like her didn't think of herself as a girl. What's the situation outside? Maya was silent for a moment. Seeing that Viserys didn't take the initiative to tell her where he had just been, she knew that he didn't want to say it. A monster bit a person to death. It's okay. Viserys shook his head slightly. Go on sleeping. That monster is not very brave. It dare not sneak into the camp. Oh. Hearing Viserys' words, Maya blinked slightly and nodded. Okay. She believed in Viserys' judgment because he had saved her life in the grey fog. Although she didn't know what the monster Viserys was talking about, with him here, it shouldn't be a big problem. Then the girl continued to get back into the sleeping bag, lying on her side beside Viserys, and looking at him with a pair of eyes. Then she closed her eyes quickly. The next morning, the smoke from the cooking rose, the sound of the iron pot colliding, and the stirring of the large shovel and spoon exuded a fragrance. Although visitors would definitely not eat such a meal on weekdays, it was still a bit more difficult under the current situation. After all, there are good ingredients, but no good chefs. It's good to have a hot meal when exploring such a dangerous forbidden area. If there weren't so many people in this operation, and no one knew how long it would last, maybe they would have to eat dry food. Viserys didn't know how the tragedy last night ended, but when he woke up in the daytime, the body had disappeared, and even the blood on the ground had disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Viserys and Maya each carried a bowl of stew in a big pot, and had a simple breakfast. Then the commander on the other side gave the order to assemble. Wildemir was still sitting on his warhorse in his uniform, and he spoke a few words in a loud voice. However, he didn't say anything like his uncle, for honor and for the city-state, but told these mercenaries nakedly that there was money to be made. It seems that Wilder still knows what these people need better, and a few simple words boosted their morale. What does Volantis want? They want dragon eggs, the manufacturing method of Valyrian steel, the cutting and building process of Blackstone, books on magic, etc. They are even willing to give up precious Valyrian steel weapons, claiming that whoever finds it will own it, and Volantis will protect his legal wealth. And if someone finds a dragon egg, it must be handed over. But Volantis will not treat the other party unfairly either, and the city-state will pay a large amount of money as a reward. Chapter 327, The Dragon's Path. The daytime expedition began. Except for a small number of people left to guard the camp, and those who were on duty yesterday could rest during the day, the rest of the people formed a mighty team, and left the camp on the edge of the beach, heading towards the interior of the Valyria continent. Wilder rode on a warhorse, and his confidants also rode warhorses to surround him. Let's go. It was obvious that he did not trust these hired mercenaries. Therefore, he and his confidants fell at the end of the team, letting the mercenaries and slaves explore the way in front, and they could turn around and run away immediately if there was any slight disturbance. The breeze blew, and the shadows of the trees swayed. There was a strong smell of decay in the air, which made people want to vomit. Be careful, watch over there. Crash. The expedition team composed of slaves and mercenaries was walking through the overgrown woods, pushing away the thorns on the ground, and carefully exploring the distance in one direction. Valyria had been destroyed for hundreds of years, and few people had been able to set foot on this continent in these hundreds of years. Therefore, many traces of the once glorious civilization have disappeared, and have regressed to the primitive age. People are struggling to find the traces that were once left behind. However, the expedition team came prepared after all. There are even several scholars who are proficient in the history of Valyria in the accompanying team. 3 of the scholars are from Volantis, and 1 is from the citadel of Old Town. This is a short and fat old man who looks very strong, with a heavy bachelor's chain around his neck. The other scholars are in poor health and sit in a sedan chair carried by slaves, while only this old man from the citadel walks on the ground with the soldiers, squatting down from time to time to study carefully. He believes that, since he has come to Valyria, he should put himself in the shoes of others and learn more. Viserys still doesn't know the name of this fellow countryman from Westeros. After all, he is afraid that he will be recognized, so he did not take the initiative to contact this person. But Viserys is a little curious about this old man. This old man must be very good at fighting. Viserys didn't know why he suddenly had such an idea in his mind. He remembered that he had heard someone say that sometimes the old scholars in the citadel would fight over a problem that they could not explain. Then this old man with a short and fat body and a neck as thick as a bull was definitely a doctor of the god of war level. Viserys looked very low-key and inconspicuous hidden in the crowd. He glanced at the old man not far away again. The other party squatted down and rubbed the soil on the ground with his fingers, and then finally retracted his gaze. When he was looking through the materials brought by Wilder last night, he saw a complete version of the Valyria map and a broken comparison map. Among them, some scholars deduced the specific location here and marked it. Now the place where Viserys landed seems to be a place called Blood Plains, and there is an abandoned city nearby called Furnace City. Furnace City was once controlled by a noble Valyria Dragon King family, but now that prestigious family has been annihilated in the long river of history and disappeared without a trace. The Blood Plains used to be part of the inland of the Valyrian Peninsula and was not near the sea. However, the continent was shattered during the Doomsday Crisis, and the plates were torn apart, so it became a coastal area. After the Valyrian Peninsula was shattered, it was mainly divided into 3 islands. The expedition landed on the island that was located in the center and was also the largest, because their goal was the city of Valyria, the capital of the Valyrian Free Fortress Empire. According to legend, this is a city that amazed the gods. The Dragon Kings of Valyria plundered the wealth of the world to build this magnificent capital. The expedition team of Volantis was ambitious. They spent such a great price just to ask for a high reward. The dragon eggs, blackstone craftsmanship, Valyrian steel casting technology, etc. that they wanted. If these things did not appear elsewhere, then they would definitely appear in this capital. The Targaryen family also started in the city of Valyria. At first, it was an ordinary noble family located in the capital. Later, they sensed the danger under the prophecy of the prophet Daenerys Targaryen and took the initiative to leave the capital and come to Dragonstone to avoid the disaster. What is this? Stone? No. We have found a road. At this time, someone at the front of the team suddenly started to shout, and it was obvious that they had made an unexpected discovery. What? The strong Meester who was walking on the ground rushed over, and the 3 Volantis scholars sitting in the sedan chair also gestured to carry the sedan chair over. It turned out that the mercenaries and slaves walking in the front had made an unexpected discovery. They found a wide and ancient Valyrian road. This road was so wide that several carriages could run side by side, allowing a large army to travel together. But unfortunately, this road has been broken, overgrown with weeds, and trees have extended to the road. This is an ancient Valyrian road. Great. We are on the right road. The Meesters and scholars who came to the front quickly determined that this was the ancient road they were looking for that could lead directly to the capital of Valyria. We will continue along this ancient road, cross a river, and then reach the capital of Valyria. With the positive discovery, the morale of the expedition team naturally became very excited, and Viserys was also much happier. Because Valyrian had successfully crossed the Sea of Smoke and arrived on the Valyria continent, landing not far from the camp. The Sea of Smoke did not have a strong hallucinogenic effect on Valyrian who flew over from the sky, and from the emotions Valyrian gave him feedback, it seemed that he had just bitten a monster to death and then chewed it alive. The monsters on the periphery could not pose a threat to a dragon for the time being. He was happy to discover the ancient Valyria road, and Valyrian's successful arrival naturally made Viserys very happy, because this means that he has no worries now. I wonder how the White Walkers and the coalition forces are fighting at the wall. Viserys thought slightly. It has been a while since he left Pentus, which is not long, but not short. However, before he left, the figures of the White Walkers had not yet appeared, only some traces of dead people. There were actually several reasons why he took this opportunity to explore the ruins of Valyria. One was because of the riots in the Sea of Smoke, and things related to the ruins of Valyria had undergone changes that caught his attention. The second was that he knew that the coalition forces and the White Walkers would not be able to decide the winner so quickly. If he stood on the other side of the narrow sea with a large number of troops and watched the people being slaughtered by the White Walkers, waiting to reap the benefits, it would inevitably give the nobles and people of the Seven Kingdoms an excuse. How much trust and support can a king who watched the people being slaughtered by the White Walkers and led a large number of foreigners to stab his own country and slaughter his own soldiers in the future when both the living and the dead were injured? Chapter 328 Attack. It is true that Viserys has a strong military force. He has more than 60,000 soldiers and 3 dragons that will grow bigger and bigger. He has fame, wealth and military force. Viserys can completely conquer the Seven Kingdoms with violence and sink all the voices of opposition. Therefore, he cannot gain the trust of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and even depose them all as civilians and replace them with foreigners. It is also possible to rule by violence without gaining the trust and support of the people of Westeros. But if he does not have both, what is the point of Viserys wanting this throne? It is more difficult to rule than to conquer, and Viserys is not ignorant of this truth. Therefore, he does not want to intervene in this war too early, and he does not want to be accused of not saving people from death, or even the reputation of backstabbing the coalition in a war between the living and the dead, which concerns all mankind. Viserys will choose to leave Pentos at this time. Because his people have left Pentos, no one can find fault with this. In the future, he can even come as a savior and win more support from the people. This is Viserys' most ideal plan. But the problem now is also obvious, that is, the distance is too far. The connection between Viserys and Bassi, the slave he injected into the black mist to recover, has long been broken. Viserys now has no way to communicate directly with Bassi. He guessed that it should be due to the distance, not the problem of being in a special area. Because Viserys can still communicate with the Black Dragon Lauren. Although the connection is broken, he doesn't think the two sides will decide the winner soon. It is not very likely that the human coalition will defeat the army of the dead. After all, the opponent is a hanger-on who will make more people the more they fight. And it is not easy for the coalition to be defeated in a short time. After all, this is the army of the 7 countries, which is the most powerful trump card of the Baratheon dynasty. What's more, there are still a lot of natural dangers behind the coalition. The easy to defend and difficult to attack Moat Cailin, the Perilous Neck, the Bloody Gate in the Vale, the Twins, Casterly Rock, etc. The possibility of humans defending the natural dangers to stop the White Walkers still exists. However, the greatest natural barrier that humans can rely on is the Great Wall. With the Great Wall, even the magic of the White Walkers cannot cross the wall. But who let the Great Wall collapse because of the internal strife of humans? Viserys was thinking about the outside world while the expedition team exploring the ruins of Valyria continued to move forward. Following this ancient dragon road, they did not encounter any troubles for a whole day, which made everyone feel very fortunate. Then the expedition team set up camp in a suitable place along the road to rest for a night and continued to set off for the capital of Valyria the next day. However, the expedition team's happiness did not last long. In such a dangerous environment, it would not be smooth sailing. Viserys was walking in the middle of the team. He had keenly noticed that there were more and more figures lurking in the woods beside the road. Pairs of bloody eyes, even saliva flowed down. If it were not for the large number of people in the expedition team that made these monsters a little hesitant, they might have pounced on them long ago. Be careful. Be alert. Viserys was the first to be alert, holding the hilt of the sword at his waist with one hand. The mercenaries and slaves around him obviously had not yet noticed the danger. Hearing Viserys' warning, Maya also became nervous and hummed softly. Swoosh, she pulled out the dagger from her thigh, skillfully turned a dagger dance, and then held it tightly in her hand. Iron Fist Gus and their brothers also became alert. At this time, the crisis suddenly came. The monsters hiding in the woods and spying on humans have gathered more and more, and then finally a monster couldn't help but pounce on them first. Raw, they haven't seen so much blood food for a long time. The sharp fangs were stained with saliva, and they let out a terrifying roar, suddenly rushed out of the woods, and bit the neck of an unsuspecting slave. The slave had a short sword on his waist and a wooden stick in his hand, beating the grass to prevent snakes from running around. But he never expected that there was such a black and white hair monster hidden in the woods. The monster ran on all fours at a very fast speed, opened its sharp fangs and bit his throat, directly biting his throat. Blood gushed out instantly and flowed back into the trachea. He couldn't even make a cry for help, and then was dragged and bitten by the monster into the woods. Enemy attack. The monster suddenly attacked, and the team reacted quickly. The slaves were not strong enough to fight and fled in all directions, while the mercenaries drew their weapons to meet them. Quick, form a formation and kill all these monsters. Wilder, the commander of the expedition team, saw that he was in trouble and hurriedly rushed up on his horse while shouting orders. Unfortunately, the mercenaries were not the soldiers he trained on weekdays. These mercenaries may be stronger than ordinary soldiers in single combat, but their team compatibility is not good, and they don't know how to form a formation, so it is easy to fall into a state of fighting alone. The commander's order did not affect too many people. Only a few dozen people formed a circle to resist these monsters. Most mercenaries chose to fight on their own. Kill. Puff, a mercenary pierced the throat of monster with a long sword, but before he could get up, another monster smashed his head with its claws. Viserys also participated in the melee. His swordsmanship was excellent, and his speed, strength and reaction were far beyond ordinary people. The monster's face was hideous, and looked like a werewolf, with sharp fangs stained with blood and a pair of scalloped eyes. The powerful hind legs had a strong jumping ability, and the black claws easily dug open the belly of a mercenary. Roar. The monster killed a mercenary, let out a terrifying roar, and then pounced on Viserys in an instant. Be careful. Maya saw the monster staring at Viserys and her heart tightened slightly, and she exclaimed. Viserys was concentrating on the monster's attack, ignoring Maya's voice. He held a bloody sword in one hand and calmly watched the other party rushing over. Then when the werewolf was about to pounce on him, he quickly dodged the monster's attack. Then the sword in his hand easily penetrated the werewolf's belly. Puff. His movements were very fast. It looked like a very skilled butcher. The sword tore the monster's belly and crushed its internal organs. Chapter 329 Plague. The monster screamed in pain, but still did not fall down immediately. Instead it aroused its ferocity. Then it roared and pounced again, grabbing Viserys with its black claws on its front limbs, trying to tear Viserys into pieces. However, Viserys' body had been strengthened, and its speed and strength in all aspects far exceeded that of mortals. Although the monster was fast, it seemed to be in slow motion in front of Viserys. The silver-haired young man's lavender eyes flickered slightly, and he quickly decomposed the monster's dying struggle and pounced, holding the long sword tightly in his hand. Too slow. Then he dodged easily again, looking very comfortable. And this time, while Viserys dodged, he held the dagger at his waist with his left hand, then pulled it out suddenly, and easily penetrated it directly along the monster's jaw. Die. The monster with black and white hair, that looked like a werewolf had hard fur. However, this fur was as fragile as a piece of paper in front of the Valyrian steel dagger. Puff. The sound of sharp piercing flesh and blood came again. Viserys' action was to relieve the force, and he was not knocked down by the monster. He also pulled out the Valyrian steel dagger, and the monster fell heavily to the ground, and a cloud of dust flew up. This time there was no sound, and it was completely dead. Viserys exhaled lightly. The speed of this monster was extremely fast and its strength was very terrible, but it was not difficult for him to deal with it. Then Viserys squatted down and carefully observed the monster he had killed. The appearance of the monster became very clear at a very close distance. Its eyes were scolloped and full of hostility, even after death. His cheeks were covered with black hair. Except for his back, his whole body was covered with black hair as hard as steel needles. There was a large piece of white on his back. His face was hideous and terrifying, and there was human blood and claws on his fangs. It seemed that it was the unlucky guy who had just been bitten to death by it. Viserys had never seen such a monster before, but looking at the other party's appearance, with a human-like body and a wolf's head, it can walk upright. What kind of monster is this? Is it really a werewolf? The descendants of the survivors of the doom of Valyria. Viserys frowned slightly, unable to figure out the reason for the existence of such a monster. This is just a trace of the Valyrian ruins shrouded in heavy fog. Perhaps the deeper you go, there are more dangerous existences. The silver-haired young man held the dragon steel dagger in one hand, and his heart was a little heavy. Then he raised his head and looked at the end of the ancient road. But there are also more amazing treasures there. Dragon eggs, dragon steel weapons, magic. The dragon eggs that Archon Volantis is looking forward to may exist at the end of this ancient road. This can lead to the capital of that great empire, where all the secrets may be hidden. Black fog, dragons, monsters, demons, etc. There is also the old house of the Targaryen family in the capital of Valyria. If he can really go deep into the capital, maybe Viserys can go home and take a look. While Viserys was looking down at the monster's corpse, another monster discovered that Viserys had killed one of its kind and immediately let out a piercing wail, then pounced on him. Eamon. Be careful, the red-haired girl gave a warning, then raised her hand and threw the dagger in her hand, trying to stop the other party. But the monster easily dodged it and then pounced on it again. Although Viserys squatted on the ground to observe the monster's corpse, he also did not relax his vigilance. In fact, Maya didn't need to warn him, and he noticed this monster. It had just bitten to death 3 slaves of the expedition team. These monsters. The silver-haired young man frowned slightly, then drew his sword, and took the initiative to meet it. A fierce battle lasted not long. The expedition team suffered heavy losses, and the monsters also suffered a heavy blow. Although the monsters were very powerful, and one monster could deal with several mercenaries at the same time, the expedition team was outnumbered after all. In the end, after paying a heavy price, they still repelled these werewolf-like monsters, leaving corpses all over the ground. Clean up the battlefield, and then continue on the road. Form a good formation this time, and be alert. Then the commander gave another order. Logically, the bodies of the mercenaries and slaves should have been cremated or buried, but Wilder and his cronies discussed and decided to abandon them here, only picking up their weapons and equipment and rations. Because they felt that these monsters should attack the expedition team because of hunger. As long as they left enough food, they should not harass the expedition team. In fact, Wilder's judgment was not wrong, but it was a little too cruel. Many mercenaries in the expedition team who were cruel even showed reluctance. After all, feeding human corpses to monsters is difficult for any human to accept psychologically. Then the expedition team continued to move forward along this dragon road, aiming directly at the capital of Valyria at the end of the ancient road. And those monsters really came out after the expedition team left, and ate the corpses on the ground. Although some monsters followed quietly, the number had become much smaller. Time passed quickly. The expedition team had been on the march for another 2 days. Today's weather was a little gloomy. I don't know if it's because we are going deeper and deeper into the ruins. Even the sun above our heads has turned black, and the surrounding fog has gradually changed from grey fog to a deeper darkness. At the same time, a light rain suddenly fell, dripping on the weedy road. The mood of the expedition team has fallen to the bottom, and there is no excitement a few days ago. The drizzle is misty, and the raindrops fall on the clothes, and soak the clothes. The road becomes muddy and difficult to walk. Forced to do so, the commander once again ordered to set up camp. They left many marks on the way here, so that they can go back smoothly in the future. However, when everyone thought that a light rain only needed a short rest before they could set off again, a plague came quietly. At first, someone started coughing, and then it became more and more intense, until they vomited blood. Everyone reacted in panic. The commander responded promptly, and isolated all those who had close contact with him. Soon after, these people showed some symptoms to a greater or lesser extent. Everyone felt chilled when they saw this scene. This ancient and mysterious lost continent is finally going to attack them. A large number of expedition members began to cough, have a fever, and even lie on the ground spitting blood, with marble-like patterns on their bodies. Quick! Burn them to death. And Wildmejia made the right decision at this time, and ordered the release of rockets to burn those infected with the plague, because only in this way can the virus be effectively killed. Viserys looked at this scene with a serious expression. He told everyone who followed him to tear off the cloth strips, to make masks by themselves, and keep a distance from others. After that, the expedition team lost a lot of members and set off again. And this time it didn't take too long. They finally saw the river guarding the capital at the end of the road. There was even a vague shadow of ruins in the distance. Chapter 330. First battle victory. Open the city. The cold gate made a harsh sound, and then a team of fully armed knights walked out of the city. They were covered with thick fur to keep warm, and the helmets were covered with hats to cover many parts of their bodies, including their ears and cheeks. Only a pair of eyes were exposed, and the turbid air from their mouths turned into white mist. The warhorse blew a whistle, and also sprayed out white mist. This shitty place in the north is really too fucking cold. The knights walked out of the city gate, and then one of the knights complained, while riding on a warhorse. The world outside the city was white, and the blizzard covered everything within their field of vision, all covered with a layer of white frost. The wind and snow blocked the sight, making Earl Lefford unable to see things farther away, and could only hear the whistling of the wind in his ears. Shut your mouth, Ramon. Earl Lefford, who was a little round, rode on a warhorse, and glared at the knight behind him who was talking without restraint. Above their heads, the northern soldiers standing on the top of Winterfell glared at them, obviously having heard what they had just said. They were soldiers belonging to the Westerly. Tywin Lannister, the Duke of Casterly Rock, did not come to the north in person, but entrusted Earl Lefford to lead the army in the westerly. Now they are carrying out a logistical mission, escorting a batch of supplies that had recently come from the south, and heading from Winterfell to the defense line of the wall. Although the Casterly Rock Knight named Ramon belonged to the Lannister family, they all had to listen to the words of the Earl of the Golden Tooth City. After all, he was now the commander of the westerly army. Ramon just snorted, and did not dare to quibble. If he really angered Leo Lefford, no one would plead for him, even if he was executed. At this time, someone next to him naturally tried to smooth things over, and took the initiative to change the subject. I heard that His Majesty Robert won a victory some time ago. It seems that these White Walkers are not that scary. Humph. The plump Earl Lefford snorted coldly, but did not say much. Not long ago, the army of the dead was approaching, and there were traces of a large number of dead ghosts in the frozen coast, Frostfang, and the Fist of the First Men. Those wild tribes who did not follow the King of the Wall, Mance Rayder, suffered a terrible disaster. And the army of the dead also gradually grew like a snowball in this process, since the frequent reports of the appearance of the White Walkers. In addition, the gap in the collapse of the Great Wall has paid a great price, and a small battlement was built in a very short time. King Robert led many generals and nobles of the coalition army to appear in the renovated Black Castle. The main force of the coalition army was stationed here. There were endless tents stretching to the ground, with all kinds of family flags hanging. The huge army was training hard every day. He was ready to snipe the enemy and fight to the death with the White Walkers here. Although King Robert's ability to govern the country was not very good, he could not be called a qualified good king. Many people even described him as a drunkard and a fool. But in terms of fighting, Robert was still brave and good at fighting, and he was considered a fierce general. A good commander will not abandon the advantage of defense. We just need to hold on to the Great Wall, I believe. King Robert's eldest brother Stannis is still the stone in the pit, smelly and hard. Although the two brothers had a brief reconciliation, that was when Robert thought Stannis was dead, and was surprised to come back to life. Then Stannis miraculously turned defeat into victory, and captured Mance Rayder alive, when he returned to Winterfell. Now forgetting the brief warmth at that time, the tempers of the two brothers are still very incompatible. Donal Noy, a blacksmith of the Night's Watch who was familiar with the three Baratheon brothers, once compared the three of them. If Robert is real steel, then Stannis is pure iron, black, hard, and strong, but also easily damaged. Like iron, it will break before it bends. As for Renly, he is like glittering bright copper, which looks beautiful, but is actually worthless. The blacksmith's words are very accurate. Stannis stubbornly stopped his brother from taking risks, like a stone. He believed that he only needed to defend the wall. Even if there was a gap, he could stop the army of the dead. And Eddard Stark also persuaded Robert that it was snowing heavily outside, and it was not suitable to take the initiative. But in the end, Robert still rejected all opinions, and personally led the army composed of elite knights drawn from the coalition of the Seven Kingdoms to take a detour, marched from Eastwatch by the sea, passed through the haunted forest, and went straight to the rear of the army of the dead along the direction of the Antler River. The White Walkers who commanded the army of the dead never thought that the human army would dare to take the initiative to attack, and they came around from behind them, and were caught off guard. Because they had intelligence as support, all the knights smeared kerosene on their swords before preparing to attack, and the arrows of the archers were also stained with kerosene. Then the army rushed out and killed the army of the dead with thousands of people, paying only a very small price. The leader of this army of the dead, the White Walker with cold skin as pale as the moon and cold and gorgeous eyes, had a one-on-one duel with the human king. He was covered with reflective armor, which changed color as he moved, and was somewhat like the armor worn by the children of the forest in the legend. He had superb swordsmanship, wielding a long sword that emitted a strange blue light like a thin crystal fragment. The White Walkers moved very fast, and were very powerful. The elite knights of the Seven Kingdoms defeated the unruly army of the dead, set them on fire, and then surrounded the White Walker. Oh, kill him! Kill him! The knights of the Seven Kingdoms rushed forward, trying to kill the terrifying White Walker. However, these elite knights had no way to defeat the opponent. Instead, they were killed by the White Walkers one after another, like a dead tree or rotten wood, without any resistance. The knight's flaming sword shattered like glass at the touch of a finger. The White Walker sword was so cold that it could crush any object, including the knight's bodies. At this time, King Robert stood up. Before leaving, he took away the Stark family's giant sword, Ice, just to prevent encountering a real White Walker. "Get out of my way." The tall man with a sloppy beard held a two-handed giant sword and roared. Then he rushed up fiercely and started a one-on-one duel with the White Walker. Ding! The giant sword Frost, made of Valyrian steel, slashed fiercely on the White Walker's frost sword. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331, Enemy at the Gate. Kill. Then the two men tangled together. Clang clang clang. White snowflakes were still falling overhead, and the weapons of the two men fighting below collided violently, even sparks bursting out. "You son of a bitch. Go back to your 7 layers of hell," Robert Baratheon roared, and sweat flowed down his round cheeks. However, King Robert, who was famous for his strength, seemed to be suppressed by the real White Walkers. The White Walkers looked thin and only had a skeleton left, but their strength was unusually terrifying, as if they had the blessing of magic. The White Walkers seemed to have realized that the identity of the strong fat man in front of them was not ordinary, so they tried their best to kill him. He let out a terrifying scream, like the sound of ice cracking, and like some kind of ancient language that had long been lost. The White Walkers wanted to kill their human king, but Robert caught the opportunity instead. Plop! The fat king fell to the ground, breathing heavily. Ding! Then he rolled on the ground in a somewhat embarrassed manner, avoiding the pursuit of the White Walker, and the opponent's ice sword chopped on the ground. "Go to hell." Then Robert held the giant sword with both hands, seized the opportunity, and stabbed it fiercely into the opponent's chest. Cap! The Valyrian giant sword pierced into the White Walker's chest, but there was no sound like a long sword piercing flesh and blood. It was as if a piece of ice was split, making a sharp friction sound that made people's teeth ache. And the White Walker was also slightly stunned, as if he didn't expect that he would be defeated by a weak human. Then the next second, bang, the White Walker's body suddenly made a loud noise, and then it exploded like ice. It became broken ice stubs all over the ground. King Robert became the first person to kill a White Walker with his own hands, and led the elite knights of the 7 kingdoms to win the first battle, which immediately greatly boosted the morale of the coalition forces. For a time, everyone in the coalition praised the king's bravery and even called the king the White Walker killer. At the same time, some people secretly mocked the two dukes for their cowardice. Because King Robert once decided to go against the crowd and take the initiative to attack the White Walkers, the plan was strongly opposed by the Duke of Winterfell and the Duke of Dragonstone. They believed that the king should stay in the safe Winterfell and should not put himself in danger. But in the end, it was proved that His Majesty was wise and brave. He easily won the war and wiped out more than 3,000 whites of the dead army with minimal losses. And all the corpses, including whites and human soldiers, were burned to prevent the White Walkers from resurrecting all these soldiers by means, and the number of whites increased. After all, the best commanders and soldiers in the 7 kingdoms were gathered here. The Baratheon dynasty in its heyday and the Baratheon dynasty that fell apart after the rebellion of the 5 kings were naturally completely different in strength. A unified king can gather strong strength in people's hearts, and the whole country will face the enemy of all mankind together. Before this battle, a noble from the Reach even proposed to ask Viserys for help from the other side of the Narrow Sea. After all, the Targaryen family had been the king of the 7 kingdoms for nearly 300 years, and now they were strong and powerful. How could they stand by and watch the death? However, as soon as this idea was proposed, it was immediately rejected by King Robert. If he had not been unwilling to kill his own people before the war, he would even want to send this cowardly fool to the gallows. Even if he lost the battle, he would never bow his head and ask for help from the remnants of the Targaryen family. In the hall, even the cold-tempered Duke Eddard Stark showed an unhappy expression. However, he seemed to think of his illegitimate son, including his complicated life experience, and then a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. This proposal was accompanied by the victory of the first battle of the coalition army, and the king's displeasure ended there. The figures of the White Walkers really began to appear outside the wall, and the news that the coalition army had won the first battle quickly flew across the neck to the south. Nobles from all over the country, who were enjoying the warm life in the south, toasted to celebrate, praising the bravery of His Majesty the King, and thanking the soldiers for their dedication. Casterly Rock, King's Landing, the Twins and other places held banquets to celebrate this moment. A small victory was boasted as a big victory, as if the moment when humans defeated the White Walkers was just around the corner. However, in fact, the nobles in the south had never seen such a monster, let alone took it seriously. Anyway, His Majesty the King was in front of them. The news spread to the wildling tribes in the deep mountains of the Moon Mountains, which were mixed with the mountain clans. The leader of the wildling tribes sneered at the celebration of these kneeling people. These people had no idea what the White Walkers were, let alone how terrible these monsters were. They even warned the mountain clans who had become friends with them that, if the situation was not right, they should be ready to run south at any time. Where is the farthest south? Is it called Dawn? It is impossible to kill the White Walkers. Their bodies are so cold that they can freeze all weapons, and they are covered with ice armor, which makes them invulnerable to swords and guns. The wildlings have a wide range of activities outside the wall, and there are many cold-resistant races that live in ice-covered areas all year round. They also encountered the real White Walkers earlier than humans, and their intelligence is much more complete than humans. At that time, the wildlings fought with the White Walkers a lot, and it was because they couldn't beat them that they ran away to the south. The White Walkers can't be killed at all, and the people they kill will be resurrected strangely, and then crawl up from the ground and become monsters like zombies. The slaves of the White Walkers are whites, and the whites keep killing other humans and creating new whites. This goes on over and over again. As he spoke, the leader of the wildling tribe shuddered slightly, as if he didn't dare to say anything more. He had already imagined the terrible scene. The number of the dead army was growing rapidly at a terrifying speed. How can this be an enemy that humans can deal with? Perhaps only the king who has 3 dragons in your mouth can defeat the White Walkers. White Walkers are not humans, and dragons are not humans either. Let these 2 extreme monsters of ice and fire that can crush and slaughter humans that will perish together. This may be the best ending for humans. The leaders of the mountain clans were all stunned by the words of the wildling leader. However, in reality, everything he said was happening outside the wall. King Robert defeated a large army of dead ghosts, but did not make the White Walkers retreat. This was just a drop in the bucket for the White Walkers. A few days later, outside the wall, in the haunted forest, the endless dark ghosts began to gather. Are these all dead people? The soldiers standing on the watchtower at the top of the wall were braving the wind and snow, and the wind was whistling in their ears. They only felt a little tingling on their scalps. Then the warning horn was finally blown. Woo! In an instant, the horn sounded loudly in the silent sky. Hundreds of thousands of whites were approaching, and a dozen White Walkers appeared side by side at the forefront of the army of the dead. The leading White Walker was wearing heavy ice armor, and there seemed to be a circle of ice crown on his bald head. A pair of blue eyes burned with cold flames. He raised his head and looked at the top of the wall. Because Martin has not written the rest, I will follow the TV series. Chapter 332, Throwing Spears. At the top of the Great Wall, Robert Baratheon, the leader of the human coalition, stood in the white snow with his storm hammer in his hand. His eyes were piercing as he looked down at the endless corpses below. He saw the White Walker riding on a skeleton horse. The other party was the leader of all the White Walkers, the commander of the army of the dead, the king of the night. The Night King. Is that his name? Edward. Robert Baratheon held the hammer in his hand. The cold wind was whistling in his ears, and the white snow was everywhere, making it almost impossible to open his eyes. Then he tilted his head slightly, and asked Eddard Stark, who was standing beside him. The last time he borrowed the Stark family's ancestral Valyrian steel sword ice to kill a White Walker, he has now returned this magic weapon to Eddard. Yes, your majesty. He should be the Night King. The middle-aged man with long dark brown hair also stood on the wall, looking at the White Walker with the ice crown on his head below, took a deep breath, and then spoke loudly. The wind and snow were so strong that it was difficult for the two to talk to each other, and they had to raise their voices and shout. The endless army of dead below also put great psychological pressure on the Duke of Winterfell. Although he looked calm on the surface, sweat even seeped out of the man's palms. On the human side, the leader of the White Walkers would be given the title of Night King. Because of the long night that enveloped Westeros when the White Walkers attacked 8,000 years ago, the leader of the White Walkers himself might not know that he had a title of King of the Night on the human side. And it was also thousands of years ago. After the first White Walker attack, the 13th Commander-in-Chief of the Night's Watch also called himself the Night King. There are many theories about his origin, such as the Bolton family, the Magna clan, the Umber family, the Flint clan of the Mountain tribe, the Knot clan, the Woodford clan, etc. Of course, there is a more widespread saying that the Commander-in-Chief of the Night's Watch is from the Stark family and is a brother of the King of the North who defeated him later. He named himself the Night King, led the Night's Watch to independence, and canonized a woman suspected to be a White Walker as the Queen. Although both are called the Night King, there seems to be no necessary connection between the two Night Kings. However, this is a story from ancient times. Except for people of that era, no one can know the secret. Perhaps it is not impossible that the two are the same person. After all, people nowadays don't even know the meaning of the existence of the White Walkers. Humph this dog thing, I'm going to smash his head with my own hands. Robert Baratheon snorted and said, to disturb the rest of the dead is the most intolerable sin. 7 gods, this damn Night King actually controlled so many corpses. Why doesn't the iron-faced and impartial father punish this unrepentant sinner and drive him to the 7 layers of hell? Robert was talking about why the 7 gods didn't punish and drive away these demons and monsters. However, there is the original text in the 7-star Bible. Demons, dead souls, or ghosts cannot harm those who believe in the 7 gods. Believers can travel the world with faith as armor. The life of a mortal is like a candle in the wind, which can be extinguished by a gentle breeze. In this world, death is not far away from us. The 7 layers of hell are waiting for those sinners who fail to repent. All sins will be forgiven in the end, but they must be punished first. Although Robert kept saying 7 layers of hell or the more vulgar son of a bitch, Robert was a pious man. He believed that the 7 gods would firmly stand by his side and help him defeat these demons and monsters. Eddard Stark listened to his good brother cursing here and opened his mouth several times, as if he wanted to say something but stopped. He wanted to tell him that they were in the north now, and the north was the territory of the old gods. The 7 gods had no power to speak. And you believed in the 7 gods, and the White Walkers must have their own gods. However, the Lord Warden of the North was a man who abided by honor and was cautious in his words and deeds. He didn't say these words after all, but just warned Robert, Your Majesty, you can't talk about the gods at this time. And below, the King of the Night, riding on a skeleton horse, raised his head and looked up at the wall above his head. His eyes were sharp, and the icy blue flames burned in his empty eye sockets. He saw 2 people on the top of the wall, one of whom had a golden crown on his head, and the other had a wolf head medal on his chest. The Night King made a harsh sound like ice cracking, as if he was expressing doubts. He saw the wolf head medal on Eddard's chest, which reminded him of something, and his eyebrows slightly frowned. The Night King frowned slightly, and the ice fog that was almost condensed around him became thicker. Then he uttered an obscure language and stretched out a hand. Another White Walker riding a skeleton white bear seemed to have a telepathic connection, and without saying a word, he took the initiative to hand a frozen short spear to the Night King. Although they were all White Walkers, they looked different from the army of dead ghosts who had lost their minds behind them, but there were also clear levels among the White Walkers. Including the White Walker killed by Robert, the White Walkers standing behind the Night King were all of lower level. Some of them rode dire elves, some rode skeleton horses like the Night King, and some rode the bodies of dead mammoths. The Night King was obviously their leader. The man, who was emitting coldness, tightly grasped the ice short spear handed to him by his subordinates, then turned around and looked up at the 2 people standing on the Great Wall. Robert and Eddard standing on the wall looked down, but could not see clearly. The Night King seemed to have asked for a short spear from his subordinates. What does he want to do? Does he want to throw it up? Robert Baratheon, holding the storm hammer, said with a little doubt. But at the same time, he suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart, because the Great Wall was 700 feet high. However, before Robert finished speaking, the next second, whoosh, the Night King looked up at the two people on the Great Wall, especially Eddard Stark standing next to Robert. A pair of eyes were dancing with blue flames, and then he raised his hand and suddenly threw the ice short spear in his hand. The short spear made a strong whistling sound that could be heard from a long distance away. It tore through the white snow curtain and flew quickly towards Eddard Stark's chest. Although the two people on the Great Wall are now in high positions and no longer need to be present in person, they were excellent warriors in their time and their reaction speed was naturally very fast. Not good. The faces of His Majesty the King and the Guardian of the North all changed. Chapter 333. White Walkers attack the city. Your Majesty, be careful. Eddard reacted quickly. The man with long dark brown hair suddenly pushed Robert away. He never thought that the first target the Night King wanted to kill was actually himself, not the human king next to him. But Eddard did not stand there stupidly waiting to die. After pushing Robert away, he also threw himself to the ground. Boom. However, just as Eddard fell to the ground and his cheek touched the cold snowflakes, he heard a loud noise from behind. The short spear thrown by the Night King was like a cruise missile, directly overturning the snow shed above the two people's heads, and directly blew it into the sky, and then fell freely behind the Great Wall. Fuck. King Robert was pushed away by his good brother, and he was lying on the ground. He was also a little frightened, with a pair of copper bell-like eyes wide open, and a lot of snow in his mouth. 7 layers of hell. This is fucking. Robert was stunned for a moment, not even knowing what to say. He watched the snow shed that was just above his head being blown into the air and then falling down again. On the other side, the captain of the King's Guard, Barristan Selmy, was standing not far away, guarding the crane. He needed to ensure that His Majesty could leave the top of the wall smoothly, and at the same time he would not eavesdrop on the conversation between His Majesty and Lord Eddard. However, the sudden change scared the white-haired old knight. Was it a crossbow that was fired? Your Majesty. Then Sir Barristan hurried over and wanted to help the king he was loyal to up from the ground. What the hell is this monster? Then before he could help, he heard His Majesty's loud curse. Hearing the king still cursing with such vigor and energy while lying on the ground, Barristan was relieved. Then the big black fat man climbed up from the ground by himself and patted the snow on his body. The short spear did not hit him, and he was unharmed, so he naturally did not need help from others. But even so, Robert was still a little frightened, which almost shattered his 3 views. His Majesty was very courageous, and he even made a bold statement just now that he would kill this shitty Night King with a hammer. However, at that time, he never thought that the leader of the White Walkers would be so outrageous. Is this a monster that humans can deal with? Throwing a spear with bare hands is like a ballista, and he even suspected that it was more powerful than a ballista. He wants to kill me. Eddard Stark, who had just saved the king, was still lying in the snow and did not get up. He was also a little frightened, and at the same time, for some reason, such a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. However, his chest was heaving and panting, and he lay in the snow and thought for a while. It should just be thrown off the right way, right? Then the Duke of Winterfell shook his head to drive away the random thoughts in his mind, and then climbed up from the ground. And below, the Night King, wearing the frozen crown, looked up and saw that he had just failed to kill the ice wolf that he hated. His frown relaxed slightly, but he didn't say much. To him, mortals were like ants. Unless the ancestors of these humans were resurrected and used magic to stop his progress, it would be impossible for these people to stop the cold from engulfing the entire world. The Night King didn't care that he didn't kill this Stark. Then he retracted his eyes, which were burning with cold flames, and fell back on the gap in the collapsed Great Wall. Originally, the Great Wall would be the most powerful obstacle to his progress. He had been waiting for a suitable opportunity, but he didn't expect that it would collapse because of the internal fighting of humans. Then the Night King remained silent and just waved his hand. Roar. The next second, thousands of whites as far as the eye could see simultaneously issued a deafening and terrifying roar. The sound penetrated the sky and shook the snow on the wall slightly. The dozen or so White Walkers behind him also controlled their mounts and charged forward, leading the ice spiders and the sea of corpses to rush towards the wall that humans had temporarily built in an attempt to stop the cold footsteps. Since the Great Wall had collapsed and the magic barrier had cracks, it would not hinder him, and the humans blocking the way were even more vulnerable. The Night King was no longer prepared to drag it out. He waved his hand, wanting these ignorant mortals to embrace darkness and death. But it was obvious that these mortals did not want to obey the Night King's orders and die willingly. Everyone, prepare to meet the enemy. Lord Randall Tully, the head of the Tully family from the Angle Hill in the Riverbend, suddenly drew his sword Broken Heart from his waist. The Valyrian steel sword reflected light in the weak sunlight. The bald man had a serious face and a short and hard beard. He was regarded as one of the best commanders in the Seven Kingdoms and had a will of steel. The motto of the Tully family is also strive to be the first on the battlefield, and generations have never forgotten the way of bravery. Randall Tully shouted orders loudly, his whole body covered in steel, commanding the soldiers to organize defense, while also eliminating the fear in everyone's heart, including himself. There is nothing to be afraid of the White Walkers. Our King Robert killed one with his own hands not long ago. Randall Tully shouted loudly to boost morale, and at the same time, looked at the sea of corpses rushing towards the battlements with deafening roars. Although he said there was nothing to be afraid of, there was no relaxed expression on his face, but a solemn expression. He had previously strongly opposed His Majesty's sniping of the army of the dead at the Great Wall. If the wall is intact, it is the best barrier, and once there is a flaw, the enemy will seize the opportunity to attack fiercely, eventually leading to a complete defeat. He thought that they should retreat to Winterfell, disperse the enemy's forces, and at the same time, clear the fields and drive all the northern people to the south, to prevent the army of the dead from being replenished. An excellent commander can come up with a reasonable countermeasure in the shortest time, no matter what kind of enemy he faces. However, King Robert, who had just gained confidence, did not accept Randall Tully's opinion. He insisted that the wall was the best place to stop the White Walkers, and he wanted to fight the White Walkers to the death here. In fact, Robert's point of view was not wrong. After all, if the White Walkers failed to enter the north, they would bear huge responsibilities. Both of their ideas had their own advantages and disadvantages. However, the difference between the two was that the king's orders were final. Randall Tully was not Stannis, who had no way to confront the king, so he could only kneel on one knee to obey the king's orders. He was now responsible for the command of the battle on the wall. Relax, boys. Randall Tully stood on the battlement, holding his family heirloom Heartbreaker, and decided to lead the way to boost morale. Prepare to meet the enemy. Raise your shields. Crash. Countless shields were raised. Spear formation. Archers, get ready. Quick, quick, quick. The sound of bowstrings being pulled rang out in unison on the battlements. All the bows and arrows were dipped in kerosene and then ignited on the fire, burning with flames. Shoot. Then, accompanied by Earl Tully's order, countless arrows burning with flames and pulling black smoke flew into the sky, forming a sea of fire, and then fell down at the same time. Burn them to death. Chapter 334, Human Ghost War. The Distant Wall, the end of the world. The war between humans and the White Walkers only really began at this time. Humans assembled the most powerful army in the history of the entire continent, Knights of the Vale. Follow my orders. The leader of the Vale Knights was Earlyon Royce of Runestone City. He was very tall and rode on a majestic warhorse with wrinkles on his face and shouted loudly. He was wearing ancestral bronze armor, holding the reins with one hand, and the warhorse paced restlessly on the ground, looking eager to try, and white mist was sprayed out of his thick nostrils. Everyone, prepare to charge. The Earl of Runestone City said in a thunderous voice, looking at the army of whites approaching not far away, and finally drew his sword from his waist and pointed it straight to the sky. Kill. Kill all these bastards. Rumble. Then the Vale Knights were in high spirits. Heavy horse hooves stepped on the thick snow on the ground, and white mist was sprayed out of their mouths. The faces of the Vale Knights under their armor showed no fear. Their eyes were firm. They raised their lances and formed a magnificent steel torrent, charging towards the army of whites. They marched forward without hesitation. On the other side, although the number of Dornishmen was small, they also did not retreat in the face of the overwhelming number of White Walkers. The one who responded to King Robert's call on behalf of Prince Doran was the prince's right-hand man, Quentyn Martell's adoptive father, and the Earl of Ironwood, who was known as the Blood Noble and guardian of the Stone Road in Dorne. Like other Dornishmen, Anders was extremely unaccustomed to the bad weather in the north. He was wrapped in thick clothes, and then he drew his sword and raised his arm. All the Dornish soldiers in sandy yellow uniforms responded in unison, all raising their spears to prepare for the enemy. Although the human army has been under great psychological and physical pressure in a short period of time, it is still full of vigor. Even under the heavy pressure, it has burst out with amazing resistance, temporarily suppressing hundreds of thousands of dead army. Hundreds of thousands of people from both sides are running, crowding, fighting on this land, and the stones on the ground are even shaking slightly. And on the top of the city wall of the human coalition, crash. Colorful flags representing various families in the Seven Kingdoms are fluttering in the violent snowstorm, standing firm. The appearance of the Night King seems to have affected the surrounding weather. The wind and snow have become more violent, and the naked eye can hardly see things a little further away. What is strange is that behind the Great Wall and the coalition is calm, as if the Great Wall has isolated the existence of the blizzard. This huge and magnificent Great Wall stands on the earth, silently guarding all humans. Humans have assembled the most powerful army in history, while the White Walkers have been forbearing for thousands of years. They have been waiting for an opportunity, waiting for the peak of the magic tide to revive. They are the natural enemies of all humans. They have no pain and no fear. Because they are dead, they bite and fight instinctively. Some of them even retain some skills from their lifetime, and can use weapons skillfully. The number of whites can increase. There was an ancient rumor in the north that the White Walkers were actually created by the children of the forest to deal with humans who wantonly cut down fish beams. But later, the strength of the White Walkers became stronger and stronger, gradually out of the control of the children of the forest, and became the number one enemy of humans and the children of the forest. The ancestors signed a covenant with the children of the forest to jointly resist the invasion of the White Walkers and drove them to the land of eternal winter in the far north. However, this is just a rumor, and no one knows whether it is credible. Viserys once mentioned this rumor, and others did not know where he heard it from, but Melisandre denied it. She believed that the White Walkers were servants of the ancient alien gods, and the ancient alien gods represented cold, darkness and death, and were the eternal enemies of the King of Light Ruler. You performed very well, boys. Randall Tolley, who commanded the soldiers of the Reach, stood on the top of the city wall, his body stained with blood, his chest rising and falling slightly as he exhaled a breath of turbid air, and then spoke loudly in a loud voice. The enemy is just a group of dead people without wisdom. Idiots. We can kill them when they are alive, and we can kill them again after they are dead. The famous general of the Reach, who has experienced many battles, is very good at commanding operations, mobilizing the fighting spirit of the soldiers, and boosting morale. The whites in these dead army are not unfamiliar to the coalition forces composed of soldiers from the Seven Kingdoms. Although they are dead, most of them are still wearing the clothes they wore when they were alive. The shadows of wildlings can still be vaguely seen on their tattered clothes and equipment. The reason why the dead army can have so many people is mostly contributed by the wildlings. The land outside the wall is vast, with hundreds of tribes living there. Even Mance Rayder has not unified all the wildling tribes. Among them, there are still many tribes that are unwilling to obey his orders, let alone follow Mance Rayder to attack the Great Wall. However, these people did not leave their homes. When the White Walkers moved south, they became fresh blood for the army of the dead. They all became fresh whites, causing trouble for humans. Your Majesty once had a chance to reconcile with the wildlings and unite all humans to fight against the White Walkers, but he missed it. The famous general of the Reach encouraged the morale of the soldiers, and he couldn't help but be distracted for a second when he thought of the identities of these people in their previous lives. He didn't know if King Robert would regret it. There was indeed a better solution at that time. Even though he captured the queen beyond the wall, King Robert burned him to death. Just when Randall Tully was distracted for a second, something unexpected happened on the battlefield ahead. Chapter 335 The Nightmare Comes. After the human coalition army had a strong will in a short period of time to repel the attack of the army of the dead, it was still lacking in stamina and lost its breath. After all, humans are complex animals and cannot be expressed in simple ways. At the beginning, the blood was boiling, and I felt that I was shouldering honor, responsibility, and faith. I fought for the country, my wife and children behind me, for those who could not fight, for the faith of the 7 gods, and to maintain the glory of the gods, and dispel the darkness. However, the reality was cold. After the initial energy was gradually washed away by the dripping blood, what came was a painful awakening. The soldiers of the 7 Kingdoms coalition tightly grasped the guns and sword handles in their hands, and cold sweat oozed from their palms. Their breathing gradually became heavy and their heartbeats were accelerating. They watched the hideous white walkers in front of them, baring their teeth and claws and rushing over. Even the gaps between their teeth still had the hair and flesh of their comrades. In the end, it was inevitable that they would have an emotional breakdown. Some soldiers could not withstand the psychological pressure and suddenly collapsed. They screamed in fear and threw down their weapons and fled backwards. However, the outstanding commanders of the 7 kingdoms gathered here and naturally had anticipated such a situation. The fully armed supervisors stood up, armed to the teeth, holding long swords and directly chopped down those who threw down their weapons and wanted to be deserters. Defectors in front of the battlefield, die. Erlandus Ironwood shouted fiercely with a bloody longsword in his hand. There is no man in Dawn who is afraid of fighting. However, at this moment, in the distance, the Night King with the frozen crown on his head rode on an ordinary skeleton horse. Other White Walkers who obeyed his orders rode ice spiders, some rode dead dire wolves and polar bears. There were even some riding half-rotten mammoths, rushing towards the human army in the distance with heavy steps. However, only he and a few White Walkers rode an ordinary skeleton horse. Perhaps he has not waited for a suitable mount. The Night King's eyes were burning with ice blue flames. He was surveying the entire battlefield with a calm look. The flames in his eye sockets flickered gently, and there seemed to be no fluctuations. Ugh. Then he uttered an obscure language. Clang. Then he drew a long sword from his waist that was as transparent as crystal, and it reflected the colorful light slightly in the wind and snow. The ice sword penetrated the violent wind and snow and pointed directly into the distance. He once again made a harsh sound, as if the ice surface was cracking. Roar. After receiving the Night King's order, the army of the dead once again roared deafeningly. Then they let out a sharp howl and rushed towards their human soldiers even more fearlessly and frantically, wanting to tear all the living things in front of them to pieces. Not good. Hold on. The pressure on the coalition's front line instantly became even greater. The whites rushed up desperately, and the human soldiers and the whites pressed against each other. Crack, crack, crack. The spears were broken by the swarming whites with their hands and teeth. They couldn't even pull out the swords on their waists and were thrown to the ground. In an instant, the front line even showed signs of collapse. Hold on, everyone. Don't retreat. The commander of the human coalition also began to shout loudly. They shouted desperately, hoping to encourage the fighting spirit of the soldiers. They must not retreat at this moment, otherwise it would be a catastrophe. Don't retreat. Those who retreat will die. And the Blood Noble of Dawn, Erlandus Ironwood, held a long sword and led the supervision team to still kill the deserters. Ordered them to face the enemy instead of abandoning their companions and running away. Puff the strong Dornish nobles once again killed a Dornish deserter. Although they were all Dornishmen and had come all the way to the end of the world, Anders did not show any mercy when he killed people. Because he knew that at this critical moment, if he was soft-handed and failed to intimidate the soldiers, there would probably be a catastrophic avalanche. By that time, the battle line collapsed, and even he would have to climb on the horse and escape. And his chest rose and fell. He was panting slightly, and cold sweat slid down his forehead. Can we win? His mind was slightly distracted, and at this moment, snap. He suddenly felt an itch in his ankle, as if something grabbed his boot. The Dawn Noble lowered his head slightly with the bloody sword, and then saw the first deserter he had killed. He had already died. The body was even covered with a thick layer of snow in the blizzard and disappeared. However, he didn't expect that at this moment. His face was covered with coagulated blood, and his body actually climbed out of the snow. His eyes turned blue at some point, blood flowed from his mouth, and he let out a meaningless howl. A hand tightly grasped his ankle, and the body crawled forward, with a sharp howl. Then he raised the dagger, that he had held tightly in his hand before his death, and stabbed it hard into the boot of Earl Ironwood. Oops. And as Ironwood's face suddenly changed, and he realized that something was wrong in an instant. Then the intense pain swept over him in an instant, and he couldn't help but wail. Ah, the blood dyed the white snow red. Tell Lord John Umber to lead the reserve team to reinforce the Dornish. The man with long dark brown hair looked at the battlefield in front of him with a serious face. Then he turned around and said to the messenger beside him. There seemed to be a sudden change on the Dornish front, and he seemed to see Lord Dundas Ironwood fall down. Then Eddard hurriedly asked Earl John Umber of Hearth City, who was preparing to reinforce in the rear, to step forward to hold it. Although the coalition of 7 nations supported the North under the coordination of the king, in the final analysis, the people of the North were the most anxious about the invasion of the White Walkers. Excluding the North, the coalition had a total of 60,000 people, and the North alone contributed 30,000 people, almost all of them. All the nobles generously sent out all the soldiers in their territories, and at the same time, they had to constantly forcibly recruit able-bodied men to join the army. Because this was a matter of life and death for the North. Yes, sir. The messenger heard Eddard Stark's order, and naturally knew that the situation was urgent, and hurriedly ran down to convey the order. However, not only the Dawn Front, but also other fronts had more or less riots. What happened? Eddard Stark frowned. He suddenly felt uneasy in his heart, and then he hurriedly mobilized soldiers to continue to fill the gap. Chapter 336 Shurfield. This is the rear of the coalition. King Robert and Duke Eddard, who had been personally scouting the enemy on the wall not long ago, had already come down from the wall on a crane, and were at the rear to coordinate the overall situation and personally command the battle. This time, Robert did not lead the charge with his warhammer. Perhaps the Night King's gamble just now scared him out of his courage. But this is not, because Robert is timid. After all, he is still a human, and the Night King is an alien that transcends mortals. He may not have reached the level of a god, but he may not be far away. Viserys's current strength is also difficult to fight the Night King one-on-one. Of course, if Balerion is added, it will be another matter. After all, Viserys does not mind pulling 3 dragons to fight the opponent one-on-one. However, the current situation, after the Night King took action, the coalition's situation became precarious. Standing at the position where Robert and Eddard were, looking down, not only Dawn, but also the human coalition line flying the flags of various families began to waver. Even the troops commanded by the commander of the River Reach, Randall Tarley, began to retreat. The front of the human coalition was rapidly falling apart. What happened? Eddard Stark frowned and clenched the wooden railing with his palms, his fingernails slightly white. His eyes penetrated the white snow and tried hard to find the flaws of the White Walkers. Then he saw a coalition soldier who had just fallen down and stood up again. He was caught off guard and fell directly on his companion, who was fighting side by side with him not long ago. What? Eddard understood what happened in an instant, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. How is this possible? He remembered that the speed of the White's resurrection was not so fast. How could this happen? Your Majesty, Lord Stark, something bad has happened. At this time, a guard ran up from the steps panting and spoke loudly. However, there was no need for the guard to report, because the Duke of Winterfell already knew everything. For the soldiers who were fighting fiercely with the White Walkers on the front line, the comrades who had just fallen suddenly stood up again and turned into fresh whites. Nothing could hit their morale more than this. First, there was the psychological pressure of attacking their former comrades. Second, they were worried that they would become such disgusting monsters after their death. The morale of the coalition forces was instantly hit hard, and the battle line began to retreat step by step, with signs of collapse. Don't retreat, push forward. The commanders shouted desperately, but at this time they could not save the gradually collapsing battle situation. He was even pulled off his horse by a corpse that suddenly climbed up from the ground. The white opened its big mouth with blood flowing from the corner of its mouth and bit his cheek fiercely, and then a shrill scream was heard from the back of the battlefield. Kill. Randall Tully held the blood-stained ancestral Valyrian steel sword Heartbreaker in both hands, led the soldiers to rush to the front line, and roared like thunder. Crack. He chopped a white that rushed towards him in half with one sword, just like splitting a broken wooden box. The white that he chopped in half died instantly. Valyrian steel swords are the weakness of the White Walkers, so it is no problem to deal with whites. At this moment, Randall Tully was bathed in blood, and even the gaps in his armor were filled with blood and tightly stuck to the lining, becoming extremely sticky. The man gasped heavily. He had personally killed dozens of whites. However, these monsters seemed to be impossible to kill completely, and they kept rushing up. Even he gradually felt exhausted. His chest rose and fell violently, and his breathing became heavy. Crack. Then he wielded the Heartbreaker with both hands, turned around and swept the sword to smash a white that rushed from behind. However, at the same time, as he turned around, another white suddenly rushed over, hugged Randall Tully's body from behind, and opened his mouth to bite his ear. The man's helmet was knocked off in the fierce battle just now, and blood smeared from somewhere on his bald head, and his face was also covered with splattered blood. Then he was suddenly hugged tightly from behind by a white, and then a sharp stabbing pain came from his ear, which went straight to his brain. The instantaneous strong stimulation made his brain clear up, and the hot blood flowed all over his cheeks. The famous general of the River Reach let out a dull and suppressed roar, and the muscles on his face were trembling slightly. Get out. Then he suddenly broke free from the white's restraints, clenched his teeth tightly, and almost broke his teeth. Enduring the severe pain, he turned around and split the white that had just bit off one of his ears in half with a sword. Blood stained half of his cheeks red and even flowed into his eyes, which became a little stinging. Randall Tully's face was covered in blood, and he closed one eye tightly, looking a little ferocious. Lord Tully, we can't hold on here. You should retreat first. There were not many guards standing beside Randall Tully. He pulled his lord's arm with his only remaining arm, his face covered in blood, and shouted hoarsely. In order to boost morale, Randall Tully led the guards to charge in front, and now the guards who followed him to the front line have all fallen down slowly without knowing it. The surrounding smoke and snow filled the air, and the soldiers of the River Reach were constantly falling down, being thrown to the ground, and bitten by the whites, and screaming miserably. Lord, it's too late. Let's retreat quickly. The loyal guards were still shouting hoarsely. Retreat? But Randall Tully was panting heavily, tightly gripping the hilt of the sword covered with sticky blood. Even he was slightly confused for a second. Even though he knew that the situation was hopeless, the civilians of the Seven Kingdoms were behind the coalition army. However, at the moment when Randall Tully hesitated, a white who came out of nowhere made a strange cry and directly pounced on the guard who had only one hand left, and then opened his mouth and bit his neck fiercely. Puff, blood spurted out instantly, splashing on the Earl's cheek. Randall Tully, holding the Valyrian steel sword, suddenly shuddered slightly, and his brain became much clearer in an instant. Gibbon. Randall Tully came to his senses, and saw that his last guard was pounced and bitten by the white. Suddenly, he was filled with grief, his eyes turned blood red, and he let out a desperate roar. Then he raised the broken heart in his hand high, and chopped it down fiercely. Chapter 337, The Allied Forces Defeat. The human coalition was defeated in the face of the attack of the White Walkers. When the Night King drew out the frozen sword, countless brave warriors who died in the battle climbed up again and joined the army of the dead. The outcome of all this was already doomed. Sometimes human power is endless, but sometimes it is so small. In the face of irresistible forces, even if you try your best, you can't change the fact that the building collapses. The coalition's front began to collapse and gradually fell apart, and then it was like an avalanche that involved other troops that were still holding on, and finally caused a comprehensive rout. Run. Run. Some people took the lead in throwing down their weapons and running away, and others followed suit. The war team could not stop so many soldiers from fleeing, and they were instantly rushed to pieces and even trampled to death. People fled to the rear in panic and some nobles of the Seven Kingdoms ran faster than the soldiers. They had already discovered that something was wrong, so they climbed on their horses, abandoned their troops and fled alone. The commanders who still wanted to resist stubbornly could not change the current situation, no matter how much they shouted. "It's too dangerous here. Lord Tarly, you leave here first." Randall Tolly, whose ear was bitten off and half of his cheek was bleeding, was also helped onto his warhorse by his soldiers. The elite soldiers of Hornhill were the best performing troops in the entire war. They were tenacious and resisted tenaciously. Like a reef in the sea, they stood at the forefront of the front line, allowing the waves from all directions to hit them, attracting a large number of whites to attack. However, even such an elite division could not stand alone and faced collapse. The wind and snow on the battlefield became stronger and stronger, making it difficult for people to open their eyes. The defeat of the human coalition was an unchangeable fact, and even if there were reinforcement at this time, it could not change the situation. Lord Stannis. As one of the highest ranking people in this war, Stannis had always been on the battlefield in person, and now he was helped onto a warhorse to evacuate first. The man with sparse hair sat upright on his warhorse. He was also covered in blood. The black cloak behind him was tattered, and the sword at his waist had been cut and bent. Stannis turned his head and looked at the few Dragonstone soldiers. There were fleeing soldiers everywhere around him. The situation was out of control and irreversible. Although Stannis was unwilling, he could only run away with the soldiers. Then he took a deep breath, held the reins with one hand, and squeezed his legs against the horse's belly. Go. Then Stannis led several guards and fled the battlefield on fast horses. Run. Run. On the ground, everyone was running away. Now it was a completely one-sided situation. The whites were chasing, and the humans were running away. Crash, and in the sky, a black crow flapped its wings and flew quickly across the sky above the battlefield in the violent snowstorm. The crow flapped its wings to fight against the wind and snow, tilting its black head, and its scarlet eyes seemed to be overlooking the battlefield below. Humanity was defeated. It saw it all. Help. Save me. In the white blizzard, countless fleeing soldiers cried for help. It was like a purgatory on earth. The collapse of the battle line was a snowball disaster. Running at the back was like waiting for death. The people in front ran slowly, and the people behind could not escape, even if they were anxious. At the same time, I don't know how many people accidentally fell, and no one bent down to help them. They stepped on them one by one, and never got up again. They were trampled into meat paste alive. Now that the coalition forces have been completely defeated, everyone is panicking. Everyone wants to survive, and everyone knows that the ghosts are chasing them. If you stop and help your companions up, wouldn't it delay your own escape time? This race is not a race against time, but a race against other people around you, and the price of failure is death. The crow saw the defeat of the human coalition, but there was no wave in his scarlet eyes, no disappointment, no joy. After all, he was just a crow, without the emotions that humans should have. And on the ground below, the crow flapped its wings and quickly flew across the sky. The ground was full of noise and chaos. All humans were running away. The dark side of human nature was exposed at this time. Some people killed their companions in front of them in order to escape, and others stabbed others in the thighs, using them as bait to delay the speed of the whites. In such a chaotic situation at this moment, no one had time to look at the sky, and the whites didn't even have a brain, so naturally they didn't care about the surrounding things. But on the periphery of the battlefield, the Night King rode on his skeleton horse, and flames burned in his empty eye sockets. He calmly examined the battlefield in front of him. The defeat of the coalition did not change his expression at all. In his opinion, these were all natural things. And at this time, when the crow's wings broke through the wind and snow and flew across the battlefield, the Night King suddenly raised his head, as if he had noticed something. A pair of eyes burning with flame stared at the black crow. For the first time, the expression on his face changed significantly, like anger, disgust, or both. Then he let out a sharp cry. The crow seemed to have sensed the coming of the catastrophe, and hurriedly flapped its wings to rise higher, flying to a higher place. However, it was too late. An ice lump condensed from the Night King's hand flew out of his hand, and flew straight into the sky, making a sharp sound that rapidly magnified in the eyes of the black crow. How then a strong spirit left its body before the ice lump hit the crow. The crow returned to normal in just 1 second, and then its head was smashed by the ice lump that came in an instant. Snap, the little head turned into a ball of blood mist in the air, and then the body fell to the ground. The Night King was still riding on the skeleton horse from beginning to end without moving a step, but this time he stared at the corpse of the crow on the ground with a sullen look. However, at the same time, a raging fire suddenly broke out on the battlefield in the distance. This was the last resort of the human coalition. If they were defeated, they would set fire to cover their retreat and ensure the retreat of the army. Afterwards, after the defeat at the Great Wall, the human coalition fled all the way to Winterfell, handing over the vast land in between to the army of the dead. And the White Walkers did not seem to be in a hurry to continue the pursuit. Instead, after occupying the Great Wall, they began to gather their troops and searched outside the wall. It seemed that something else attracted the attention of the White Walkers. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, The Capital of Valyria. The Distant Wall of Despair. The second war between humans and the White Walkers finally came to an end. Perhaps because of the victory in the first battle, King Robert Baratheon became a little arrogant after personally killing a White Walker. He arrogantly wanted to stop the Night King at the wall and completely defeat the army of the dead. However, it was indeed a great defeat. The coalition army fled to Winterfell in a panic, and the cold wind of death blew over the wall and enveloped the land of the north. Winter seems to be getting colder. And in the distant Valyria, the temperature here is also dropping sharply after a heavy rain. The red-haired girl hid in a dark cellar, her full chest rising and falling gently, and she was panting. In the silently Gian's hung, only the girl's breathing was clearly audible. Damn it, she bit her teeth lightly. Her whole body was covered with blood, and she didn't know whether it was her own or someone else's. Since entering the ruins of the Valyrian capital, the series of horrific things she encountered have almost made her mentally collapse. Many things have happened in the past few days, causing the situation to take a sharp turn for the worse, and the expedition team has been completely torn apart. The commander of the expedition, Wilder Medja, the nephew of the governor of the Volantis Tiger Party, was attacked and killed by a black shadow that fell from the sky after entering the capital. The opponent's speed was extremely fast, even faster than the werewolves they had encountered before, and he jumped directly from the ruins of the city wall and took the opponent away. When Wilder's confidants chased after him, only half of the commander Wilder's body was left on the ground. The commander was dead. The expedition team, which was already decimated, was facing a situation of collapse. Because this was far from the beginning of the nightmare, the ignorant and fearless people tried to explore the secrets of the gods for the sake of profit, and finally suffered terrible punishment. Only now do people understand why so many people who explored the ruins of Valyria before were able to come out alive. Plague, curse, monster attack. Dangers opened up like raindrops, and only a few people could dodge them one by one. When crossing the Sea of Smoke, all the people who were infected were still unaware of what they had done. A few days after arriving at the ruins of Valyria, all these people began to break out with diseases one after another. At first, the commander thought it was a plague, a drizzle, or there was something wrong with the water source and fruit on the island. However, when he killed all the people suspected of being infected with the plague and burned all their bodies, the nightmare continued. People kept falling down during the march of the team, and then they never got up again. The bodies showed marble patterns and bleeding from all 7 orifices. At first, Viserys, Maya, and Gus, a group of survivors, did not realize what the reason was. But until more and more people died, they suddenly realized that it was these people who had absorbed the grey fog who began to get sick. However, in the face of such a serious situation, Wilder, the commander of the expedition, still refused to give up. He rashly ordered the team to move forward. His uncle entrusted him with such an important task and paid such a great price to reach the capital of Valyria. Wilder was unwilling to give up at this time. Then only a few hundred people were left in the team and arrived at the turbulent Red River outside the capital of Valyria. Viserys didn't know what color the river was originally, but now it was as bright as blood and exuded an unbearable stench. There should have been a magnificent bridge here, but now there are only 2 bridge piers left under the Doomsday Scourge. The expedition team certainly didn't have the ability to repair the bridge, but began to cut down trees to build some small boats, relying on the ropes they carried to transport people one by one. However, on the river, the expedition team was once again attacked by some underwater monsters and finally paid a very tragic price to pass the river. In fact, after so many hardships, many people in the team have retreated. But in this situation, even if they are afraid, they dare not leave the team and escape. Otherwise in Valyria, which is full of monsters, I'm afraid that leaving the team will directly enter the belly of the monster. Then, the few remaining expedition teams finally entered the ruins of the Valyrian capital. This once magnificent capital is now only left with ruins, but it is all wild grass growing wildly. The city gate has long disappeared, and only half of the city wall has not collapsed. And it was at this time. The team had just carefully entered the ruins, and a black shadow jumped down from the half of the city wall and unexpectedly snatched away the commander who was walking at the end, and ate half of his body. After the commander's death, the team officially broke out in internal strife. Some people wanted to leave, while others thought that, since they had gone through hardships, and came to the depths of the Valyrian ruins, how could they return empty-handed? Then a conflict broke out between the two sides, and Viserys naturally stood on the side of the latter. He had not yet figured out the secret of the black fog. How could he leave so easily? Myr also had reasons to continue exploring. Gus and several mercenaries who had been on the same ship hesitated and stood firmly on the side of Viserys, because they seemed to have realized that following this silver-haired young man seemed to be able to avoid a lot of danger. However, before these people could come to a conclusion, another monster attacked the expedition team. This time, without a unified command, people began to flee in all directions. At first, Viserys and his men were still hugging each other, but in the end, the mercenaries died after an attack, and Myr lost contact with Viserys. She killed a monster alone, and was seriously injured, and then hid in a cellar under the outermost waste of a city. I'm afraid I can't escape. In the darkness, Myr leaned against the wall of the cellar alone, thinking silently in her heart, and at the same time, bandaged her wounds with strips of cloth torn from her body. Hiss fuck. The red-haired girl bit her teeth slightly, and cursed when her fingers touched the wound. However, she didn't realize that in the darkness, there was also a pair of eyes staring at her. Its breathing gradually became heavy, and saliva dripped down. However, the red-haired girl was completely unaware of this, and was still gritting her teeth, trying hard to bandage the wound. Chapter 339, Life-Saving Grace. At this moment, the monster hiding in the shadows finally couldn't help but attack. Ho! A black shadow roared, suddenly rushed out of the darkness, and rushed straight to Myr, who was completely unprepared. Myr was bandaging her wounds, but she reacted quickly. Since entering the ruins of Valyria and encountering a series of monster attacks, she has almost developed a passive alertness and shuddered at the slightest movement. Now, when the humanoid black monster pounced on her, she reacted instantly and almost subconsciously rolled to the side, avoided the most fatal blow of the monster. Boom. The monster's body hit the wall of the cellar hard, making a loud noise, and the dust above its head fell down. Myr rolled to the side, holding the dagger tightly in both hands. The wound on her body was pulled, and the intense pain made her face slightly tighter, and her breathing became more rapid. In the faint light from the gap in the cellar above her head, Myr saw the monster in front of her clearly. This monster had black hair, and was completely different from the werewolves she had seen before. He could walk upright, had strong limbs, had tattered strips of cloth on his body, and could even use some simple weapons. He looked like a human, but with a simple mind and no way to communicate. Damn monster. The girl gritted her teeth as she looked at the monster and then pounced on it. Myr was not a delicate princess. As a mercenary, she had killed many people, and she also knew that it was useless to beg for mercy in the face of such a monster. Either the monster died, or she died. The monster opened its mouth wide, drooling continuously, its sharp teeth reflecting light slightly, and a meaningless rolling sound came out of its throat. Then it stood up and pounced on Maya. Maya's movements were very sharp, and she had been prepared for a long time. The biggest advantage of humans over monsters is that they have brains. She judged the direction the monster would pounce in advance, and then dodged it narrowly, and stabbed the monster's mouth with the dagger in her hand. Puff, the clear sound of piercing flesh and blood. It hit. A trace of joy flashed across the red-haired girl's eyes, but this joy did not last for half a second. After the monster was injured, not only was its movement not restricted, but it was even more aroused. Its mouth was injured, and a dagger pierced through its lower jaw, and then it let out a painful roar, raised its sharp claws, and grabbed the girl in front of it. Maya's reaction speed was already very fast, but it was still difficult to dodge the next attack. After dodging the first attack at such a close distance, the monster's claws tore her clothes apart, and then directly opened a long wound on her abdomen, with flesh and blood rolling. The fight between the man and the beast was extremely short, and it only took a moment for both sides to suffer losses. Although the monster was also seriously injured, it was obviously in much better condition than Maya. The girl's abdomen was severely injured, and she was slapped away, and fell heavily to the ground. She could only watch the monster pull out the dagger stuck in his jaw, roaring in anger and pain, and then slowly approaching her. "Are you going to die?" Maya gasped heavily. The intense pain after the abdominal injury made her face pale, and she lost too much blood, and even had some blurred consciousness. She tried to drag her body with her hands to hide backwards. If possible, she didn't want to be buried in the mouth of such a disgusting monster, even if someone could end her life for her. Such a thought came to the girl's mind. However, at this moment, the entrance to the cellar above her head was suddenly opened. Caca. After getting used to the darkness, the light shining down from above seemed particularly strong. The girl's consciousness was blurred. She seemed to see a figure falling from the sky and jumping directly onto the back of the monster. At the same time, the long sword in his hand pierced through the back of the neck fiercely. "Go to hell." The man stabbed the monster to death with a sword. Maya's pale cheeks finally relaxed slightly, revealing a smile, and then fainted. Swoosh. Viserys pulled out the long sword from the back of the monster's neck. Blood gushed out, and the corpse fell down weakly. A black mist penetrated into Viserys' palm along the blade. This was Viserys' discovery after entering the capital of Valyria. The monsters here would exude a large amount of black mist after being killed. This black mist far exceeded what Viserys absorbed outside, and this discovery made Viserys very excited. Because he came here to solve the secret of the black mist, but since he came to the ruins of Valyria, he has not noticed any answers related to the black mist. It was not until he entered the core area of the ruins, the former capital of the Freehold, Valyria, that he made a breakthrough discovery. There were traces of the black fog everywhere. Others might not see it, but in Viserys' eyes, everything was exposed. The capital of the Freehold was once deeply shrouded in this black fog. This discovery forced him to make such a conclusion. Why? However, hundreds of years have passed, and no one knows what happened before the destruction of Valyria. The people who stayed in this royal city at that time have died, or have been transformed into some kind of monster. No one knows how they angered the gods, and why they were punished so horribly. However, he finally took the first step towards solving the secret. When Viserys killed the monster, he turned around and found that the girl had fainted. Then he hurried over. There were 4 deep wounds on the girl's abdomen. The deepest wounds could even see the internal organs, and the amount of bleeding was also very large. In just a short time, the ground beneath her had been dyed red. It's bad. The injury is too severe. Seeing Maya's injury, Viserys' heart sank slightly. He could see that such an injury was almost incurable, and it wouldn't take too long for the girl to die completely. No. However, Viserys frowned and clenched his fists. Although they had known each other for a short time, they had experienced such hardships together, and the relationship between the two was still very good. Viserys couldn't watch this poor girl die. There is another way. The silver-haired young man thought for a moment, and now he couldn't care less about hiding his identity. Then he threw the long sword aside and pressed his palm on her forehead. The black mist just absorbed continued to pour into Maya's body. Chapter 340 Awakening. Then, I don't know how much time has passed. The cellar was still dark, and the red-haired girl lay quietly in the open space. First, her dry lips trembled slightly, and then she subconsciously called for water. Viserys, who was sitting next to the wall holding a sword, and seemed to be asleep, woke up instantly. Then he took out the water bottle he carried with him, and put it to Maya's dry lips. It was like a long drought and a sweet rain. As the clear water flowed in, the girl's throat rolled, and she instinctively asked for more water. Then her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and she finally woke up slowly, with a hint of confusion in her eyes. Am I dead? Is this hell? Although Maya didn't have any beliefs, no matter what religion, there would be a relatively unified statement about the world of the dead. There was filth and dirt, the environment was bad, and all kinds of demons were rampant, which was somewhat similar to the current situation of Valyria. However, the girl immediately felt the severe pain from the wound, and her face turned slightly pale. The silver-haired young man sitting next to her heard her words, and was about to make a joke, but the words stopped in his throat. Because he saw that the girl's bright eyes in the past now looked dazed and dead, as if covered with a deep shadow. I thought I was really dead. The girl's voice was hoarse and weak, and she saw Viserys. She knew that the other party had saved her by some unknown means, not that he was also dead, and the two came to this underground world together. She knew that this guy was hiding a big secret. The identities of the two people were very different. He would not die anyway. Sorry. The girl's voice made Viserys' joy disappear a lot in an instant, and then he sighed. Maya's life was saved by the black fog, but it also meant that she might not be able to escape her own shadow in this life. With the black fog as a hindrance, she would never escape. Viserys didn't intend to have too deep communication with Maya. The identities of the two were indeed very different, so he kept a certain distance at all times, and planned to leave quietly after this adventure. However, he did not expect that so many accidents would happen during this journey. The cellar fell into a brief silence, and then the girl lying on the ground, whose injuries had not yet fully recovered, spoke again. I sense the existence of it. This sentence made Viserys raise his head slightly, and he knew that the other party was referring to the black mist he injected. It seems to have repaired my body, making my body even better than before. But the price is that I seem to be inseparable from you. Maya's last words echoed in Viserys' heart. It seems that the girl is smarter than Bessie, and she figured out the correct use of the black mist in a short time. It established a bridge of communication between the two. Can I know who you are now, Aemon? Viserys was silent after hearing her words, and then he slowly spoke after a long silence. He told Maya his true identity, because at this time, it was meaningless to hide his identity from the girl. Viserys Targaryen. Although she had been mentally prepared, Maya still opened her mouth slightly when Viserys revealed his identity. She had thought that Viserys might be a noble young master with ancient blood and noble status. After all, he had long silver hair. But she never dared to imagine that the young man in front of her was actually the famous Targaryen Dragon King. How could this be possible? Wasn't he in the distant Pentis? How could you? Maya's tone was a little hurried, and how could a man of such noble status as Viserys personally take risks to explore the ruins of Valyria? Malachamija, the governor of the Tiger Party, did not dare to come, and could only entrust his nephew. The high and mighty people did not dare to go deep into this devil's land in person. There is never anything impossible in this world, Maya. Viserys seemed very calm. For him, he had already done a lot of adventurous things. Reality is more exciting than you think. An 8-year-old boy went to Bravos alone, and later when he grew up, he led 200 guards to Pentis knowing that the other party had bad intentions. The other party wanted to kidnap him to blackmail the dragon, but he was thinking of seizing the city. If he hadn't been treading on thin ice, he wouldn't have survived until today. If he hadn't been bold and reckless, he wouldn't have been able to establish such a foundation. So for many adventures that seemed to be dancing on the edge of a knife to outsiders, Viserys was actually fully prepared. Did Viserys know that the tattered prince had evil intentions? Of course he knew. John Connington knew, and even many people knew. But Viserys didn't kill him because he still had value to be used, and the tattered prince couldn't make any waves in his hands. However, at this moment, boom, a huge roar suddenly came from outside. Run. Then there were footsteps and human voices. Mercy, mercy. However, the miserable plea for mercy didn't last long before it choked in the throat. Viserys and the girl in the cellar looked at each other, and both of their faces changed slightly. This place is not safe. Go. Viserys' face changed slightly, but he still spoke very calmly, then hurriedly helped Maya up and carried her on his back. Some members of the expedition team accidentally ran away and led the monsters here. And these monsters living in Valyria have extremely keen sense of smell, and they have suffered losses before. Wilder's body was found, and not long after, a large number of humanoid black-haired monsters swarmed in, and the expedition team suffered heavy casualties. It was also at that time that Viserys and Maya separated. Viserys carried the girl on his back and was about to leave the cellar, but suddenly a low roar came from above his head. The monster's low roar was hoarse just above the two people's heads, and Viserys' footsteps suddenly stopped in place. The silver-haired young man's eyes condensed slightly. One hand pulled the girl on his back, and the other hand grasped the hilt of the sword. The next second, boom, the cellar stone slabs above the two people's heads shattered. A monster with dark black hair fell from the sky, making a strange cry, and rushed straight to Viserys. Viserys reacted quickly, and he dodged the monster's attack easily with the red-haired girl on his back. However, there was more than one monster. Then, several pairs of greedy scarlet eyes appeared above the cellar, which made Viserys' heart sink slightly. Chapter 341 Valyrian Soldiers. It would not be difficult for him to deal with these monsters by himself, but he was obviously hindered by carrying the girl on his back. Put me down, Viserys. Maya spoke weakly while being carried on Viserys' back. Viserys had saved her life, and she was very grateful. She did not want to implicate Viserys because of her own reasons. In such a dangerous environment, she knew how troublesome it would be to run away with a burden. However, Viserys frowned slightly and did not turn around, but whispered to shut up. Then the monster that Viserys faced could not bear it anymore. Even though the other party had a strong dangerous aura, it roared and pounced. The monsters in the ruins of Valyria seemed to be cursed with gluttony. Every monster Viserys saw looked like it was starving to death. Viserys was also very calm in the face of danger. He drew out the long sword at his waist and dodged it when the monster was about to pounce in front of him. Then the long sword in his hand easily pierced the opponent's neck. Puff, blood gushed out. Black mist poured into the body, and Viserys kicked the corpse away. Several other monsters also pounced on them. Viserys tightly grasped Maya's arm and took a deep breath. Then the two turned into a ball of black mist and disappeared on the spot. Roar. Several ferocious monsters collided with each other and looked at the empty place and roared in confusion. The figures of Viserys and Maya were made of black mist and reappeared outside the ruins of the dilapidated house. The scope of Valyria city is very large. Viserys and Maya are now only in the outermost civilian area. From here, there are more palace ruins in the depths of the city. That is where the nobles of the Free Fortress live. The Valyria Free Fortress is neither a kingdom nor an empire. All the people of the Valyria Fortress have a say in the rule. But in fact, only the ancient 40 families of Valyria have the qualifications to compete for the rule of the Free Fortress. The Targaryen family is one of the 40 families of Valyria, but at that time, the Targaryen family's strength could only be ranked as a tiny one in the freehold. Therefore, the Targaryen family also has a palace in the city of Valyria. However, a lot of information about that year was lost in the turmoil of King's Landing hundreds of years ago. After so many years of historical changes, there are not many materials left on Dragonstone for Viserys to read. He is not sure where the Targaryen family palace is located in the city. If he can find the location of the family palace, Viserys will have made a worthwhile trip. The girl on Viserys' back once again opened her mouth wide, her face full of disbelief. What is this? This time she really felt the magical power. She didn't know when the black fog repaired her body and snatched her back from the side of the death because she fainted at that time. However, this time Maya watched Viserys and herself turn into black fog together. Then it flowed freely in the air like water, passed through the hole above the cellar, passed through the window, appeared in the alley outside the ruins, and then condensed again. This feeling is really amazing. Is this the magic you use to control the dragon? The girl asked weakly in shock. Viserys turned his head and looked at her, but did not explain anything. The ability of black mist is not just to turn himself into a ball of black mist, but everything he touches within a certain size can be turned into black mist and wander in the air with him. This is why his clothes and weapons can still be preserved intact after he turned into a ball of black mist, otherwise they would all be thrown away. However, at this time, the roar of monsters came from behind. It seems that they had smelled the scent of the two people again and chased after them. The silver-haired young man did not hesitate and turned around and fled with the burden on his back. Several monsters chased at a very fast speed and climbed over the broken walls of the ruins, while a human ran away with another person on his back and disappeared in an instant. The sky gradually darkened. Night fell. The dim moonlight penetrated the mist and sprinkled on the ruins of this ancient and mysterious city. It was so quiet that even the chirping of insects and birds could not be heard. Viserys carried Maya on his back and walked through the ruins of Illyria City. They avoided the monsters' pursuit again and again. During this period, they also met other members of the expedition team, but the number of humans had become smaller and smaller. Then the two of them panicked and appeared in the depths of the city ruins. This was the center of Illyria. They fled into the ruins of a magnificent palace. The monsters active on the outskirts of the city chased here and seemed to be afraid to continue chasing. And here they thought they could breathe a sigh of relief, but the two made a new discovery. Viserys pulled the girl to hide in the dark. Looking at the scene not far away, his pupils couldn't help but shrink. How is this possible? Are they alive? No, they are dead. He saw rows of soldiers covered with black hair. Their cheeks were no longer visible, as they were covered with black hair that covered their noses and mouths, with only a pair of scalded eyes clearly visible. They were wearing tattered armor and patrolling the interior of the palace with weapons in their hands, as if they were controlled by something, repeating over and over again, seemingly never tired. And they were also emitting a black mist that was very familiar to Viserys. Were these monsters humans in their lifetime? Maya also lay beside Viserys, lowering her voice and asking in disbelief. The two people were smeared with a lot of monster blood, which temporarily suppressed the breath of living creatures on their bodies and played a little concealment. This was the experience the two people had learned from being hunted down. Now Maya's injuries have recovered a lot, and she no longer needs Viserys to carry her all the time and can get down and walk independently. Obviously, Viserys also lowered his voice and frowned. Monsters don't wear armor. And Viserys had previously speculated that these monsters might be the former residents of Illyria or their descendants, who were cursed or changed beyond his imagination. Eventually, they became black-haired monsters that lost their minds. Chapter 342 Stone. Now it seems that Viserys was right in his guess. These are not monsters, but living people. However, they may not be called people now. They have lost their minds and have been completely manipulated into hungry monsters, devouring everyone who tries to uncover the mystery of this lost civilization. But Viserys is more concerned about another thing. These people are different from the black-haired monsters on the periphery. They should have been soldiers of Illyria in their lifetime. Because Viserys saw the armor they were wearing, although it was tattered, it could withstand the wear and tear of time better than ordinary clothes. They were all surrounded by black mist, which reminded Viserys of the black mist he injected into Bessie and Maya. Could they have been injected with this black mist in their lifetime? Who did this? Their lord? Or the gods of Illyria? Balerion, Merixes or Fahagel? Or something that Viserys didn't know yet, and now he knew nothing about it. But now Viserys was in trouble. This group of neatly arranged Balerion soldiers were walking towards the place where he and Maya were hiding. The two of them happened to block the direction of the patrol. Were they really all human? Then how did they become like this now? Maya was lying next to Viserys, and it was obvious that she was still a little bit unbelievable, because those black-haired monsters had completely lost their humanity, leaving only the desire for flesh and blood. If these people were all Valyrian soldiers, then those monsters wandering around the city, those wolves that could walk upright, fish that could run on land, and monsters in the blood-red river, were they all animals? The only remaining biological levels on this lost continent were actually divided so clearly, from animals to human rulers. If they are really all Valyrian soldiers, then they must be controlled by something. Faced with the impending danger, Viserys' voice remained calm. He glanced at the Valyrian soldiers who were walking in this direction, then took a deep breath and spoke in a low voice. There are two choices now. Ma. Viserys turned his head and looked at the girl beside him, and Maya also looked up at him with a sharp gaze. Her eyes were very firm. Needless to say, the rest of the story. The silver-haired young man nodded slightly. Okay, I understand. Snap. Then he suddenly grabbed the girl's shoulders, and with a whoosh, the two of them turned into a ball of black mist and disappeared on the spot. The next second, the team of monster guards who had patrolled here walked to the place where Viserys and Maya had just landed and paused for a moment, with a clear look of confusion on their faces, but it was not very clear under the black hair. Then, as if the machine had stopped for a while, the team of soldiers continued on their way and continued their eternal patrol in the palace. After Viserys and the other disappeared, they appeared in a side hall of this magnificent palace not long after. The architectural style of Valyria is somewhat special. It can be said that it brings together styles from all over the world and combines the strengths of hundreds of schools. All the civilizations they have conquered have their buildings in this city. Moreover, Valyria's architectural stone carving technology is extremely advanced, which is also one of the things that the Volantis Tiger Party hopes to get on this trip. Even though it has experienced the terrible doomsday disaster and hundreds of years have passed, many buildings in the capital of Valyria have been preserved. Viserys and Maya explored the dim side hall carefully with the help of the weak moonlight outside. Fortunately, there are no monsters in this side hall, but nothing valuable has been found either. Most of them are artifacts from the Valyria period, as well as embellished gems and gold, and most of the rest have decayed. If you take out a few of these things casually, they are priceless treasures. However, compared to money, Viserys is more concerned about other things, and it is not easy for him to take so many things away. Then the two left the side hall and continued to explore along the corridor, passing through a garden that had long been dilapidated and overgrown with weeds. Fortunately, there is no patrol of that kind of monster here. The two men walked through the garden and followed a path straight to a half-broken tower. This seems to be the place where the owner of this palace once rested. The interior of the half-collapsed tower was luxuriously decorated with decaying gorgeous carpets and tattered silk. The two men carefully explored and then walked up the stairs, but at this time they encountered a black-haired monster squatting on the ceiling. The other party was obviously different from the controlled Valyrian soldiers, but it was somewhat similar to the monsters outside the city. It seems that this black fog is extremely precious, and not everyone is qualified to have it. The Valyrian soldiers patrolling in the palace are also the guards of a large family that once lived here. Perhaps the strength of this family is stronger than the Targaryen family. After all, Targaryen has always been a poor student among the 40 noble ancient families in Valyria. The monster made a strange cry and pounced down, as if she did not expect that a living creature would actually walk here. Although Viserys and the other man were caught off guard, they still successfully solved the other party. Fortunately, the noise made by the other party was not very big and did not attract the attention of the patrolling soldiers outside. There is a spacious bedroom on the second floor of the broken tower. At the entrance is a metal thing that looks like a family crest. It seems that a person is herding sheep. Valyria seems to have started as a semi-pastoral nation. However, although Viserys did not recognize this pattern, it did not prevent him from searching in this room. The bookshelf in the room has decayed, and the books on it have become extremely fragile due to time. Viserys carefully searched for books that might be valuable, and then carefully put them away. On the other side, Maya was also looking for something in the room. This bedroom is spacious and beautifully decorated. The fireplace has been cleaned. There is nothing else except a lot of dust. In the middle, there is a large bed that can accommodate 3 people, but it has collapsed. At this time, Maya noticed that there seemed to be a dark box under the collapsed bed. What is this? Then the girl walked over and opened the box, reached in and touched it, and was slightly stunned because she felt like she touched a background stone. Chapter 343 Dragon Egg. Viserys. At this time, the girl's voice suddenly sounded in the silent room, startling Viserys, who was concentrating on searching for information about the black mist. Viserys raised his head slightly and looked at her, only to see that she was squatting in the mess under the bed, with a box in front of her. She looked at the things in the box, and a strange expression appeared on her face. Maya, what's wrong? Viserys asked in confusion. I think I found a few stones. Do you want to come and see? Maya looked at the 5 round stones in the box and said uncertainly. She didn't think that a noble Valyrian noble would collect 5 beautiful big stones under his bedroom bed. But no matter how she looked at it, these looked like 5 stones. These 5 stones were indeed very beautiful, and the surface seemed to be attached with a layer of hard scales, reflecting light slightly. Maya picked up one with her hand, and it was a bit heavy. Stone. Viserys on the other side was slightly stunned when he heard Maya's words. He didn't think the owner of this place would collect some beautiful stones under his bed. He was not friendly. But then Viserys' heart skipped a beat, and he reacted quickly, as if he suddenly thought of something. Stone. Let me see the stone you found. Then he carefully put down the book in his hand and walked over. This is. However, when Viserys came closer and saw the stone in Maya's hand, his heartbeat accelerated. Sure enough, he knew that a Valyrian nobleman would not only collect a beautiful stone under his bed. At this moment, the red-haired girl held an oval dragon egg in her hands, and there was a layer of bright red scales on the surface. Although it has been unknown how many years, the dragon egg is still perfect as new, even shining. Do you know what it is? Viserys took the red dragon egg from Maya's hand, held it in his hand, and looked at it for a while, and then spoke. However, when his fingers just touched the dragon egg, he felt a warm feeling. He knew that the dragon egg was responding to him, which was definitely different from the first time he saw Valyrian. Viserys knew that his bloodline was aroused. Now the blood of the Dragon King in Viserys' body is much purer than that of his sister Daenerys, and even comparable to the ancestors of the Targaryen family in the Valyrian period. His eyes are as deep as violets, and his long silver gold hair has almost reached the point of sparkling. His bloodline characteristics are more obvious than anyone else. The warmth generated by Viserys touching the dragon egg made him more certain that it was a dragon egg. The red-haired girl didn't know what this stone represented, but seeing the excited expression on Viserys' face, she seemed to have guessed something. Although this thing feels like stone, it is a very regular oval shape. Could it be? No. It won't. It can't. Viserys, this can't be a dragon egg, right? Maya's heartbeat also accelerated a little. Her face flushed slightly. She looked at the fiery red stone in Viserys' hand, and then asked cautiously. Yes, you are right. This is a dragon egg. Viserys also smiled and nodded slightly. This was the first time he was so happy since he came to Valyria. He held the red dragon egg in his hand and then looked at the box that was neatly stacked with 4 dragon eggs of different colors. Maya found a total of 5 dragon eggs. 5 dragon eggs. You know, the Targaryen family now has only 3 dragons. Viserys' heartbeat accelerated again, and seeing the joy on the face of the handsome silver-haired young man in front of him, his eyes as bright as violets were also happy. Maya was also happy from the bottom of her heart. After Viserys was happy, he slightly controlled his excitement, and looked up at the red-haired girl. Do you know how much you have done, Maya? After Viserys calmed down, he looked at the other person with a pair of lavender eyes and spoke as calmly as possible. One of my vassals exchanged 3 dragon eggs for attendance at the Imperial Council and the position of Chancellor of the Exchequer. And your 5 dragon eggs can even exchange for the protection of a territory for you. Viserys promised generously. What do you want? Gold, castles, titles. Just ask. His voice sounded calm now, but every word was worth 1,000 gold, and the person who hit him couldn't help but feel dizzy. He could take these dragon eggs without paying a penny. After all, he saved the girl's life and could repay the favor. However, Viserys has never been a stingy person and disdains to do such things. This is why he can tolerate the little actions of the tattered prince until today. He is very tolerant and will not burn bridges. As long as the tattered prince does not seek death himself, he will not die. And for Maya, she found 5 dragon eggs for Viserys, which is naturally a great achievement. Viserys told her without hesitation that she could ask for anything she wanted, as long as it was within the value of the dragon egg, he would promise it. Maya was slightly stunned when she heard Viserys' promise, but then she did not excitedly tell him about her ideals and ask for a high reward as Viserys had imagined, but instead became silent. What's wrong? Seeing the change on the other's cheek, Vizor's smile slowly faded. He instinctively reflected on whether he had said the wrong thing just now, and whether his attitude was a little too high and mighty. However, when Vizor's was about to apologize, Maya finally spoke. "I didn't think about these just now." The girl took a deep breath and then whispered, "I don't know what I want either. Can I wait a little longer? I'll tell you what I want after I think about it." Vizor's was silent when he heard the girl's words, and the words he wanted to apologize just now were swallowed back into his stomach, and then he finally nodded. "Yes, sure. You can tell me anytime you want. I will satisfy you in any way I can." The 5 dragon eggs were very heavy. Vizor's and Maya packed them up with great effort and carried them on their backs. Vizor's planned to give the dragon eggs to Balerion when he left. Then the two searched the bedroom again, but found nothing else of value. Then they left the half-collapsed tower and quietly groped towards the main hall in the middle. Chapter 344 Ancient Nobles. Valyria civilization was once extremely glorious, and this is also reflected in the ruined capital. Valyria has 40 of the oldest families, and each of them has a luxurious palace in this city. What Vizor's is exploring now is only one of them, but it is already as big as the Red Keep in his memory. The dragon egg has been found. What else do you want? The girl covered the bandaged wound on her abdomen with one hand, which has now been magically repaired by the black mist. She followed behind Vizor's and whispered, "There are still many secrets in Valyria. Are you willing to go back like this?" Vizor's turned his head and looked at her, and Maya thought about his words for a while, and suddenly felt that it made sense. "You are right. If it were me, I would not dislike having too many dragons." Then she closed her mouth and did not continue to speak. But she did not hold back for too long, and then she could not help but speak again. Obviously, after a night, Maya's mood has recovered a lot, and she is still the lively and enthusiastic girl. "So where is your dragon?" "Vizor's, I have heard your name in Volantis. Everyone says you are the young dragon lord, and that your dragon burned tens of thousands of Dothraki to death." Maya kept talking, and her words made Vizor's look a little strange, and he glanced at her. "Where did you hear these rumors? How could a dragon burn tens of thousands of people to death? If that were true, Balerion would be exhausted to death." Then Vizor's raised his head and looked at the sky above his head. It was dark tonight. There seemed to be a huge figure looming in the sky. "As for my dragon, he came with me," Vizor's said. "Is your dragon here too?" Maya was a little surprised because she didn't see where Vizor's dragon was. However, Vizor's shook his head slightly and didn't explain much. At this time, another team of Valyrian soldiers patrolled not far away. The two of them quickly hid behind a stone pillar. The silent patrol team didn't notice anything this time and just walked past them. "Let's go." Vizor's looked at the Valyrian soldiers with black auras going away, and then spoke in a low voice. "Yes." Maya nodded. Then the two disappeared here and continued to go to the main hall. Although the palace was very large, it didn't take too long for the two creatures to penetrate through layers of obstacles in the face of monsters everywhere and finally appeared in the main hall. During this period, they encountered the most dangerous moment, but the Valyrian soldier who discovered it was dragged into the overgrown grass by the two people and stabbed to death. "Is this where the king of Valyria lives?" Maya couldn't help but whisper inside the hall. In her opinion, this palace was a bit too luxurious. "There is no king in Valyria," Vizor's said without turning his head. The hall was very dark, and the patrolling soldiers didn't seem to approach the hall. The two people who found this were relieved, so they took out flints to get some light. However, when the firelight slightly dispelled the darkness around them, the two people's movement suddenly froze in place. Vizor's felt a little creepy in an instant, and couldn't help but pull Maya to pull her behind him. It turned out that the firelight dispelled the darkness in the hall. The two saw a fully armed monster wearing full armor and covered with black hair sitting on the throne in the center of the hall not far away. He was very tall and much stronger than the other Valyrian soldiers. His eyes were scarlet and flashed with violence and reason, and seemed to be constantly switching. He held a book in his hand, and there was a long sword in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the two intruders, and behind him stood 6 Valyrian soldiers. "What is this?" Maya shuddered, and then was pulled behind by Vizor's, and exclaimed in a low voice, "Is he a living person? Impossible." It has been hundreds of years since Valyria was destroyed. Viserys was also staring at the other person, one hand on the hilt of the sword. He wanted to say that no one could live for hundreds of years unless he was a god. But the word came to his lips, but he didn't say them. This world contains too many secrets, and he is just a beginner who is deciphering them. He should be the master of this place. Viserys also found that the other person was different. He didn't pounce on the living person like other black-haired monsters. There was even a hint of reason in his eyes, like the master of this palace, wearing helmets and armor, and like a Valyrian general who was good at fighting. Then the next second, the other person suddenly stood up from the throne and put down the book in his hand. Then he took the sword from the shelf on the table in front of him, took heavy steps, and strode towards the two people. After a fierce struggle, the violence in the eyes of the Valyrian noble general suppressed reason and prevailed. Now he is no different from the monsters outside, full of violence, but there seems to be logic in his mind. The 6 Valyrian soldiers behind him also surrounded the two people, and more soldiers from the palace rushed over not far away. It seems that they are all obeying the orders of this man. What should we do? Surrounded by these black-haired monsters, Maya asked nervously. Should we use that method to escape? She meant to turn into black mist to escape, but what she didn't know was that Viserys could not always use this method. If he used it beyond the scope, he would get a splitting headache. Viserys took a deep breath and didn't speak for the first time, then handed the dragon egg on his back to Maya. What should we do? Viserys actually had a headache. There were too many monsters in the city of Valyria, and he would be attacked every 2 steps. Now it is almost certain that something must have happened on this land on the eve of the doomsday. It caused all these people to become monsters, and perhaps the wrath of the gods later was also related to this. Kill him. Then the silver-haired young man made up his mind, drew the long sword at his waist, and went straight to the other party. At the same time, he was calling Valyrian's name in his heart. If he was alone, he could get away smoothly, but with a burden, he could not guarantee the girl's safety. In an instant, the loud roar of the dragon resounded through the sky. Valyrian received Viserys' call for help, and then swooped down from the sky. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345. The tall Valyrian noble general wearing heavy armor also heard the loud dragon roar that pierced the sky, and a struggling expression appeared in his eyes again. His eyes became a little complicated when he looked at Viserys. He saw his long silver gold hair shining brightly, and Viserys did not miss this opportunity and stabbed the opponent's throat with a sword. The noble general reacted quickly, and his eyes were once again dominated by violence. Even though he lost his mind, he still dodged Viserys' sword under the memory of his muscles. Then he let out a roar, swung the heavy sword in his hand, and chopped directly at Viserys. Although several Valyrian soldiers surrounded the two, they did not take action, as if they had received the general's order. Ding! Viserys dodged nimbly, and the long sword slashed fiercely on the ground, and gravel splashed out, leaving a deep mark. Viserys' eyes froze slightly. Without waiting for him to react, the Valyrian general swept his sword again, trying to cut the silver-haired young man in half. This time, Viserys had no way to retreat or dodge, so he could only raise his sword to block. Clang! The metals collided violently, and sparks burst out. Viserys felt a slight numbness in the palm of his hand, and the sword in his hand broke instantly, and the tip of the sword flew out, and fell to the ground beside him. Viserys himself was safe and sound, and once again dodged the opponent's attack. You are quite strong. Much stronger than the power of the mountain. Viserys shook his hand slightly, which was numb from the violent collision, but it was not a big deal. The opponent was obviously a little surprised that the young man in front of him had so much strength that he could take his sword. Then the violent color in his scalded eyes became more intense. Be careful, Viserys. Maya couldn't help but exclaimed when she saw this scene. His sword seems to be Valyrian steel. Valyrian steel is extremely sharp and will not break or curl, even after hundreds or thousands of years, so the general was able to cut off the long sword in Viserys' hand with one sword. However, this is the first time that the expedition team has seen this kind of weapon made of Valyrian steel since entering this lost continent. In fact, people have always had a misunderstanding about Valyrian steel, thinking that even a soldier in this land of the once glorious civilization would be equipped with Valyrian steel armor and weapons. But in fact, the production process of Valyrian steel is extremely complicated, and it is suspected that magic is injected into it, just like the blackstone process. There are two types of blackstones in the world. One is an oily blackstone of unknown origin, which is widely seen in wonders around the world, and the other is a stone built under the flames of Valyrian dragons. In fact, even in the Valyrian freehold, Valyrian steel weapons are extremely rare. Only nobles are qualified to hold them, so they are so rare in the outside world. For example, the ice of the Stark family, the broken heart of the Tully family, the long claw of the Mormont family, etc. These were all forged by the nobles of Westeros at great cost and commissioned by Valyria. However, Viserys did not panic, even though his sword was cut off. He rolled on the spot and dodged the man's pursuit again. He swept the broken sword across his knees and forced the other party back. Then he stood up, holding the broken sword in one hand, and pulled out the Valyrian steel dagger from his waist with the other hand. Roar! The general in full armor roared with both hands holding the sword, and then rushed over again. This time, after his attack was dodged by the silver-haired young man again, the broken sword in the other's hand cleverly drilled into the gap in the armor and cut the flesh of his thigh. Then, at the moment when the general felt pain, another sword cut off his wrist holding the sword. Puff! Viserys rushed over with a Valyrian steel dagger in his hand, and the dagger pierced into the opponent's throat like lightning. Puff! With a dull sound, the tall black-haired monster collapsed and knelt on one knee. The blood from his throat gushed out and dyed his armor red. His body was a little spasmodic, but the scarlet in his eyes quickly dissipated at this time. Then he raised his head and looked at Viserys, and with his last strength, he raised his finger in the direction where he was sitting not far away. "What do you want to say?" Viserys took a deep breath and raised his head with a frown, not knowing what the other party meant. But the Valyrian nobleman was no longer able to explain, and then his body fell heavily to the ground, and a huge black mist was absorbed into Viserys' body. The soldiers around him, and those who were about to rush over also turned into a black mist, and were absorbed into Viserys' body. Why did they disappear? The red-haired girl standing behind Viserys was holding a package containing 5 dragon eggs, with a look of doubt on her face. The sudden change just now happened too quickly. The situation took a sharp turn for the worse when the sword in Viserys' hand was cut off a second ago, and the next second Viserys suddenly seized the opportunity to kill the opponent instantly. After the leading Valyrian noble fell, all the controlled soldiers around him turned into black mist and disappeared on the spot. Roar! At this time, a huge dragon roar came from Maya's head, and it spread far away in the silent night. Countless Valyrian residents in the city were disturbed and terrified by the black-haired monsters they had turned into, and the survivors of the expedition team who were hiding in the dark and trembling were all stunned. They didn't expect that there was still a living dragon in the ruins of Valyria. Valyrian swooped down from the sky but was late, and Viserys had already dealt with all the enemies here. Boom. Then Valyrian's heavy body fell to the ground, smashing the floor and stirring up dust. He raised his slender and elegant neck and roared loudly again. Valyrian, a dragon, had been wandering in the ruins of Valyria for so long, and Viserys had never called him. Now he finally got the chance to appear, and he seemed very excited and eager to try. However, when he flew down, he found that all the monsters here had been solved by Viserys, and he was immediately a little unhappy. But Viserys ignored him. He only found a book that seemed to be about demons and devils in the direction pointed by the man. This book is about. Viserys flipped through it briefly and raised his eyebrows slightly. Chapter 346. Escape. Valyria has evolved for hundreds of years since the Doomsday. Now, the Valyrian language in each free trade city is different. Viserys simply flipped through the book and found that he didn't recognize many words in it. Perhaps some words in the Valyrian language, passed down from generation to generation by the Targaryens, have been assimilated into the common language. Study it after you go back. Then he carefully put the book away. The material of this book is quite special. Even after hundreds of years, it is still as good as new. He felt that the man didn't seem to have any bad intentions when he pointed before he died. Perhaps he was intentionally reminding him, the younger generation, something. The book he handed over must be extremely important to Viserys. Maybe he had a premonition of something on the eve of the doomsday, so he put on his armor, held this extremely important book in his hand, and made full preparations. However, despite this, it is definitely not the place to study ancient books. Then Viserys whispered an apology to the remains of the ancient noble, and then he took off the Valyrian steel armor on his body, and picked up the Valyrian steel sword. These are all good things, and Viserys certainly won't waste them. Valyrian's thick nostrils sprayed out white mist, expressing his inner dissatisfaction, and his breath was like thunder. He had been waiting for so long to appear, but he did nothing after his sudden appearance. However, Viserys ignored him, which made Valyrian a little depressed, and a dull sound came out of his hideous head. Then a pair of huge eyes fell on Maya, who was almost scared silly on the other side. The red-haired girl swore that she had never seen such a behemoth in her life. When she just learned about Viserys' identity, she was looking forward to seeing the legendary dragon. However, when the dragon really fell from the sky, Maya felt her brain go blank, and her whole body seemed to be out of control. She could only stare at the huge monster in front of her with wide eyes. But when Valyrian turned his head and locked his eyes on her, all this turned into a deep fear. However, the more afraid she was, the more she couldn't move. Her legs felt like they were filled with lead. Then, in the girl's eyes, the dragon slowly poked its head out in the night and came close to her. The hot air rushed in her face. This was the foul air exhaled by Valyrian. It was like being in front of a volcano, blowing the girl's hair all over the sky, and she couldn't even open her eyes. It won't eat me in one bite, will it? And Maya suddenly had such a strange thought in her mind. Logically, Viserys' dragon wouldn't do anything to her, but a dragon is still an animal after all. What if it suddenly went crazy? Dragons are very intelligent. It may even be smarter than some humans. At this time, Viserys' voice suddenly sounded. This voice was like a handful of cold spring water in the hot summer, and it instantly saved Maya. The dragon slowly raised its head, and the girl breathed a sigh of relief. She wiped the cold sweat from her forehead, and found that she could move again. She was really scared just now. Although she was ready to die not long ago, she was able to survive and come back to life. Now that she has survived the difficult times, if she is bitten to death by Viserys' dragon, where can she go to seek justice? Then what was it just? Maya wiped the cold sweat from her forehead, then turned her head and looked at Viserys. The silver-haired young man had already sorted out the things he wanted to take away from here, including the ancient books and the very important book from the bedroom, a set of Valyrian steel armor and a long sword. At this moment, he was moving these things to Valyrian's back. Fortunately, before leaving, Viserys installed a set of equipment on Valyrian's back to hold these things. Hearing Maya's question, Viserys, who was sitting on the dragon's back, spread his hand slightly and then raised his chin towards her chest. It wasn't looking at you just now, but at the dragon eggs in your arms. Those are its few people. Viserys' voice was flat, but it spoke out a bloody and cruel reality. They were already the last dragons in the world, and Valyrian's interest seemed to have become much lower. Perhaps Valyrian thinks you are much more important than me now, and it certainly won't hurt you. Okay, get on quickly. Then Viserys patted the seat behind the dragon. Valyrian usually didn't like to let other people ride on his back, but Maya was an exception. The other party was holding 5 dragon eggs at the moment, and Valyrian was very careful, of course, not to hurt the other party. Can I ride a dragon too? Maya instantly became excited when she heard Viserys' words. After all, the girl still had a lively personality, and in an instant she forgot the scene of being scared just now. And since Viserys has guaranteed it, there shouldn't be any danger. The girl asked tentatively at first, and then got a positive answer, and then asked again. Then how can I get up? Maya looked at Valyrian's tall body, and was a little confused. She didn't see how Viserys climbed up just now. Climb up from Valyrian's wings, Viserys said as he sat on the dragon's back. However, at this moment, before Viserys finished speaking, a terrifying dragon roar suddenly came from afar. The layers of sound waves swept by the sound seemed to push away the dark fog in the sky like clearing the clouds and seeing the sun. The sky of Illyria City had never been so clear. At the same time, a figure larger than Balerion appeared on the horizon and was flapping its wings towards this side. Behind him, Viserys could vaguely see billowing black smoke rising into the sky, like a pillar reaching the sky. What is this? A bigger dragon? Maya, who was about to climb onto the dragon's back, was slightly panicked, and Balerion seemed to sense the danger and became a little agitated. That is, however, Viserys' eyes passed through the terrifying dragon and fell on the black smoke behind him that was faintly reaching the sky, and his pupils shrank slightly. I'm afraid that's where the secret of the doom of Valyria is hidden. For some reason, Viserys suddenly felt this way, and then he was deeply uneasy. Get on. Viserys pulled Maya onto the dragon's back. Then, without emerging, Balerion let out a low roar, flapped his wings, and flew directly into the sky, flying towards the sea of smoke outside Valyria. On the ground below, the members of the expedition hiding in the dark saw the figure on the dragon's back, and their eyes widened instantly. It's them. They can actually ride a dragon? Then, driven by a strong desire to survive, they mustered up the courage to run out and shouted for help to the sky. Help. Help me. However, Viserys and Maya were in the sky, their ears filled with strong winds, and they could not hear any sound from the ground. His voice only attracted two black-haired monsters, which immediately tore him to pieces. Chapter 347. Over the Sea of Smoke. How the wind howled in the sky of Illyria, and it kept pouring into the ears of the two people. Viserys lay on the dragon's back, and Maya hugged his waist and back tightly from behind, fearing that he would fall from the sky. Maya's first experience riding a dragon was not very good, because there was a bigger guy chasing them desperately behind them. Why is it chasing us? The girl hugged Viserys' waist tightly, and did not dare to relax at all, shouting at the top of her voice. Then she was filled with a mouthful of wind and choked with coughing. What do you think? Why are those black-haired monsters chasing us? That's why it is chasing us now. Viserys grabbed the handrails on the dragon's back with both hands, and the wind whistled in his ears. Although the two were very close and tightly pressed together, they could even feel the softness of their backs, but Viserys also had to shout at the top of his voice to make Maya hear him. Chasing behind Balerion was a larger dragon. Balerion's growth rate was very fast. After 2 or 3 years, it quickly grew to a length of 30 or 40 meters. However, the longer the length, the larger the size. Balerion's growth rate tended to be slower, but his growth still steadily suppressed the other two brothers by 3 times. Balerion's size is now definitely a true sky overlord, but if he was born a few hundred years ago on the eve of the doom of Valyria, when the huge empire collapsed, his size would only be considered average in the empire. There are hundreds of dragons on the Valyrian peninsula, and the size of the dragons continues to grow with their age, and it seems that there is no limit. The oldest dragon in Valyria is even more than 200 meters in size. Balerion is really like a small earthworm facing these dragon ancestors. The dragon that is chasing him now seems to be only 40 or 50 meters long, but it is still much larger than Balerion. The survivors of the doom of Valyria were transformed into some monsters with black hair all over their bodies, and some of the dragons that once lived on this land naturally survived. They were all emitting thick black mist, and seemed to be affected by the black mist, losing their minds, and becoming a strange state between death and life. Viserys couldn't tell whether they were alive or dead. It should have been attracted by Balerion. Viserys said. The dragon did not appear when the expedition entered the city of Valyria. It was only when Balerion roared from the sky that he disturbed the other party and then flew over. Viserys held the saddle ring tightly. The fierce wind made the girl behind him unable to open her eyes, but Viserys performed better. His extraordinary physique strengthened all aspects of his physical fitness, allowing him to open his eyes even in such a strong wind. Hula. Then the silver gold long hair danced wildly in the wind. Viserys turned his head and looked behind him again, while holding the saddle ring. In the distance, a black smoke rising from the sky was still spewing black mist continuously. The ground shook like a volcanic eruption, and the fog that filled Valyria and even the entire sea of smoke seemed to come from here. What on earth is this thing? Viserys didn't know what it looked like in the past few hundred years, but now it seemed to have become very active. The riots in the sea of smoke outside seemed to come from here. He had a strong premonition that the secret of the doomsday scourge of Illyria was hidden there. Then Viserys took another deep breath and turned his head to look at the dark green dragon that was also chasing in the sky. Its eyes were bloodshot and its body was emitting black smoke. It was still chasing desperately, and the distance seemed to be getting closer and closer. It seems that there is no escape. Viserys' heart sank slightly, and his will was conveyed to Balerion, asking for its opinion. After all, the core of this battle was Balerion, not himself. However, although Balerion could not speak, he instantly conveyed an extremely strong will, and the vigorous fighting spirit continued to rise. Although the opponent was larger in size, it was enraged and wanted to tear the opponent apart completely. Ho! The black dragon kept flapping its wings, making a low roar from its mouth, and a pair of scarlet eyes flashed with anger. The light in the gaps between the scales around it became more and more frequent with the heavy breathing. Good. Viserys received Balerion's reply, and it expressed a strong will to fight to the death with the other party, and Viserys would naturally not drag Balerion's feet. Dragons and dragon riders are partners who help each other and complement each other. Balerion, let's kill it together. Viserys gave the order while riding on the back of the dragon, and at the same time told Maya behind him to hold him tightly because he might not care about her next. Balerion became more excited when he received Viserys' affirmative reply. Roar! A pair of scarlet eyes surged with amazing fighting spirit, and the wings that shook the sky and covered the sun drew an arc in the sky, and a deafening roar came from his mouth. Now the two dragons, one chasing and the other fleeing, were far away from Valyria. They appeared in the sky above the sea of smoke. It should be relatively safe here, and no other Valyrian dragons would be attracted here, so Viserys dared to fight to the death with the other party here. Go. Then Viserys gave the order again. Balerion dived towards the dragon that was even bigger than him without fear. Under the grey sky, the deep night enveloped the boiling sea water, and grey fog kept surging from under the sea. The two dragons fought in the sky above the sea of smoke, alarming the residents under the sea. Splash! The long tentacles kept floating with the sea water, and the huge head was hidden under the water and floated up and down. At this time, another huge monster swam slowly past it, seeming to stir the sea water, and the tentacles of the sea monster silently wrapped around the other's body. However, this action angered the huge whale, and it then bit off many of its tentacles. Woo! The ocean overlord made a melodious and harsh cry, and then the two sea monsters under the sea of smoke started a fight. And in the sky, the surging red flames illuminated the entire sky. The two giant dragons spewed out dragon flames at the same time and collided violently. The scattered fire snakes fell down, becoming the most beautiful scenery in the sky. Roar! Then they all burst into roars. Chapter 348 Battle in the Sky. Although Balerion was smaller than the other dragon, he was extremely fierce. He spewed out surging dragon flames and collided with the other dragon. Then he vibrated his wings and rushed down to fight the green dragon in close combat. Boom. Two behemoths that were tens of meters long and nearly 100 tons fought each other in the sky. They collided violently and made a dull sound. The dragon roared like thunder. Roar! Balerion's figure was undoubtedly knocked away, making a deafening roar, and a shocking scar appeared on his body covered with black scales. However, the black dragon's huge wings spread out and flapped continuously to stabilize the dragon's body. It was not afraid of fighting at all. Then the ferocious head was raised high again, and it dived down again with the wind and flames without being discouraged. At this time, Viserys, who was sitting on the dragon's back, also untied his belt and pulled out the Valyrian steel sword he had obtained not long ago. This sword has a gilded crossguard, a black hilt, and a sharp blade that is as smooth as water. It is a half-handed sword that is slightly longer than a regular longsword and shorter than a two-handed greatsword. It can be used with one hand or two hands. Clang! Viserys pulled out this Valyrian steel sword whose name he didn't know, and the sharp cold light illuminated his cheek. The silver-haired young man held the dragon scales tightly with one hand, and the wind whistled in his ears. Then he climbed up from his seat, turned his head and spoke loudly to Maya. You will be a dragon rider in a while. Hold on to the saddle ring. What are you going to do? When Maya saw Viserys' actions, her tone became a little distorted in shock. She held tightly to the place where Viserys' hand had just been held in the whistling wind and dared not let go. She had a very ominous premonition when Viserys pulled out the sword, and now this premonition is becoming a reality. What am I going to do? Viserys seemed very calm. He stood on the dragon's back, his long silver gold hair fluttering in the wind, holding the scales tightly. Have you seen Hollywood blockbusters? What? Maya didn't quite understand, and Viserys smiled a little, shook his head, and didn't explain anything. It's okay, I just said it casually. If you don't understand, forget it. Then Viserys continued to speak. Dragon riders must fight side by side with their dragons, so of course I'm going to kill this beast. Are you crazy? Maya on the other side understood this sentence and felt that her nose was about to be crooked. She thought Viserys must be crazy. She was so nervous now, and this man actually wanted to personally get involved in the fight between dragons. Can you intervene in the fight between dragons? You don't have wings. Who do you think you are? Gods. The red-haired girl held the saddle ring tightly and shouted loudly against the wind. The gods can't save our current situation. Viserys shrugged slightly. He was worried that the fight between the two dragons would attract more terrifying monsters in the Valyrian ruins. After all, Valyrian's roar had attracted a dragon not long ago. If we don't get rid of it, it will be difficult to escape. Although Viserys seemed to be indifferent to Maya's complaints, he was actually very nervous, so he couldn't help but speak out his heart to relieve the pressure. Although he had experimented with the feasibility of this move before, this time he used it in actual combat, and at such a height, his legs were a little weak. Boom. But the next second, the two dragons that had fired real fire collided fiercely again. Valyrian showed his ferocity. After being injured, he became more and more courageous and rushed up to bite the other side fiercely. On the back of the dragon, Viserys held the scales tightly and withstood the huge impact force without being thrown out. He and Valyrian were in tune with each other, and he was secretly directing Valyrian to fight with the other side. At this time, Viserys finally seized the opportunity. Now, swoosh, the silver-haired young man squatting on the dragon's back suddenly let go of his hands and jumped down with his legs. Holding the Valyrian steel sword, he stabbed the green dragon's scalded eyeball from top to bottom at close range. The green dragon obviously didn't expect the human on the other dragon's back to be so bold. He seized the opportunity and suddenly jumped down and stabbed his eyeball with a sword. He couldn't dodge and was stabbed hard. Puff. Viserys jumped down with the Valyrian steel sword in his hand and stabbed the green dragon's eyeball. The next second, roar. A painful dragon roar suddenly came from the grey sky. The green dragon kept flapping its wings chaotically, its huge body twisting and struggling in the air, and its shrill screams resounded throughout the sky. One of the green dragon's eyes was blinded by Viserys, and blood flowed out. Viserys was undoubtedly thrown out by the green dragon's violent struggle and fell freely from the sky. Viserys. Maya, who was on the dragon's back, saw this scene and her eyes widened. Her eyes instantly turned red. If she fell from such a height, she would be killed, even if there was a sea of smoke below. The red-haired girl couldn't believe that Viserys was going to fall and die. Her eyes turned red and tears welled up. They were carried away by the howling wind and scattered in the air. Valyrian also seized this opportunity. While the green dragon was struggling and falling from the sky, he opened his bloody mouth and bit off one of its hind legs. The blood spilled onto the sea without cost. Valyrian bit off one of the green dragon's hind legs, leaving only pale bones. Roar. The green dragon let out another earth-shattering painful roar in pain, raised its other hind leg, and grabbed Valyrian's body fiercely, instantly adding a deep new wound to the black dragon's body again, and dragon blood splashed in the air. However, Maya was completely unaware of this. The red-haired girl just held the saddle ring in front of her tightly, and tears kept falling like pearls from a broken string. She didn't care whether Valyrian won or not. She only cared whether Viserys was still alive. Why are you crying? However, at this moment, a hand reached out from behind Maya and patted her shoulder. Viserys? Maya's face was still covered with tears. She turned her head and looked at the panting person standing behind her with disbelief. Viserys was covered with splattered dragon blood and unknown liquid in the dragon's eyeballs, and looked a little embarrassed. He turned into a ball of black mist after being thrown down and returned to Valyrian's back. Just as Balerion was about to swoop down to end the life of the green dragon, several more dragons appeared in the distance. Sure enough, this battle broke the peace of Illyria, and the dragon infected by the black mist began to gradually recover. Balerion, retreat. Viserys, who saw this scene, had a slightly tense expression. The green dragon let out a huge roar and fell into the sea of smoke. In an instant, it was spotted by a sea monster hiding under the sea of smoke. The dragon roared. Although Balerion wanted to bite the other party to death, he had to obey Viserys' orders. The huge wound on his body was still bleeding, and he fell into the sea of smoke. Then he spread his wings and flew out of the sea of smoke. Soon after, the layers of smoke in the sea of smoke were close at hand, and the distant sky was pale. Chapter 349 Sea of Sighs. Boom. A huge sound rang out. The black dragon descended from the sky and landed on the ground with difficulty. The earth trembled, and the airwaves swept with strong winds, and dust rolled and spread in all directions. There were depressions and cracks on the ground. At the same time, countless towering trees along the way were also affected by Balerion's wings and collapsed. Balerion was injured in the battle over the Sea of Smoke not long ago. The fight between the dragons was very bloody. Balerion bit off one of its hind legs with the help of Viserys, and the black dragon itself was severely scratched by the opponent's claws, leaving a huge bloody wound. The blood was sprinkled on the Sea of Smoke without cost along the way, attracting countless monsters under the Sea of Smoke to gather, hoping to wait for Balerion to fall from the sky and then have a full meal. Unfortunately, Balerion was stronger than they imagined. The black dragon carried a man and a woman on its back through the layers of fog in the Sea of Smoke and flew over the ruined city of Orus near the Sea of Smoke. This was once one of the cities of the Free Fortress, but it was later devastated by the Doomsday Scourge. Now the fog riots of the Sea of Smoke seem to be expanding. The fog that used to cover the sea has now invaded the continent, gradually enveloping the city that connects to the Essos continent. It continues to invade the deeper land of Long Summer. Before setting off, Viserys had heard that the people of Illyria and Taurus, who were farther away and close to the slave bay, had begun to move their families away from this city, fearing that one day they would wake up and be wrapped in the fog of the Sea of Smoke, and then they would never be able to get out again. Now, the black dragon carrying Viserys and Maya broke through the fog, and the demonized dragon chasing behind seemed unable to get out of the fog and did not continue to chase. They finally arrived at the land of Long Summer, and then Balerion finally couldn't hold on because of his injury and excess of blood loss, and landed from the sky with difficulty. They fell into a forest on the edge of a vast lake, breaking several towering trees, and the violent impact made the dragon's roar more dull and painful. The fall of the dragon had a huge impact on the small animals living in the forest, and they fled away from their homes. Balerion lay on the ground weakly, unwilling to move. There was still the flesh and blood of the green dragon in the gap between his sharp teeth. Its breathing was a little heavy, and the wounds on its body were even more shocking, with bright red blood flowing. "How is it?" Maya asked with some concern. Viserys and the other man had jumped off the dragon's back and sat on the grass on the side. The two of them were helpless about the dragon's injuries. After all, they couldn't even treat people, let alone treat dragons. Viserys and Balerion communicated with each other through telepathy, then shook their heads and said, "Balerion said it will get better after a rest. The dragon has a strong self-recovery ability, and the injuries caused by the green dragon are not very serious. The main reason is that it did not get an effective rest after being injured, and flew for a long time. As a result, the wound could not be healed, and too much blood was lost, and finally it fell, after leaving the Sea of Smoke." "That's good." The red-haired girl also breathed a sigh of relief, then stood up and walked to the sparkling lake not far away. Her clothes had become tattered, but the girl was not hypocritical and knelt down by the lake full of gravel. She stretched out her hands and scooped up a handful of clear lake water, but did not drink it directly, but licked it gently with her tongue, and then frowned. "Salty. Where is this?" She didn't expect that the lake water here was actually salty, just like seawater. Now the horizon has been emitting a hazy light, and the sun gradually rises from the east. The bright sunshine penetrates the layers of clouds and suddenly sprinkles on the ground, and the shadows of the trees sway gently. Viserys was sitting on the grass on the side, trying to comfort Balerion. He heard the girl's voice and raised his eyebrows slightly. The lake water is salty? Then the silver-haired young man stood up and walked to the lakeside and came to Maya's side. He looked up at the vast lake and squinted his eyes. We may be near the Sea of Sighs now. According to the map, their escape direction was not the planned trajectory. Instead, they followed the city of Valyria, passed through Trier, flew over the Sea of Smoke, and arrived at Taurus, and then continued to fly forward. The land under their feet should be the legendary Long Summer Land, where few people go. Since the arrival of the Doomsday disaster, the Long Summer Land has been affected. Most of the local residents have moved away, and the Long Summer Land has become a vast uninhabited area. This is the Long Summer Land, and this endless lake is the largest inland sea in the world. There is a narrow waterway under the continent that connects to the open sea, which is called the Sea of Sighs. So we fled to the Sea of Sighs. Maya knelt on the gravel beach of the lake, looking a little dazed. The morning sun shone on the sparkling water, shining with golden light, and fell into the girl's eyes. Fresh air, the fragrance of grass leaves. We really escaped from there? Yes, we escaped from it. Viserys also took a deep breath, and the morning sun brought a hint of warmth. Staying in the mist of Valyria, they haven't felt the warmth brought by the sun for a long time. Although it was only a short half a month, even Viserys felt as if he was in another world. He really felt the beauty of life, and being able to see the sun rise every day was the happiest thing. Sure enough, in addition to water and food, sunlight is also indispensable to human life. What are your plans next? The two stood by the sparkling lake, and then Viserys tilted his head and asked. The girl kneeling on the gravel beach let go of the lake water in her hand, and there were scars on her white calves. She looked up at Viserys standing beside her. Remember what you said before? The girl said softly. Of course. Viserys nodded slightly. This is your reward. If you have any wishes or desires, just ask. Maya found 5 dragon eggs for him, each of which was priceless. This was a promise Viserys made to her, and he would not go back on it. I heard that respected warriors in Westeros would be knighted. This was part of the Angle culture, and Maya didn't know where she heard it from. I want to be a knight. The girl said without hesitation, and it seemed that she had already come up with this answer a long time ago. Chapter 350 White Knight. Maya wanted Viserys to personally knight her. Viserys obviously didn't expect that the girl wanted only this much reward from him, and was stunned for a moment. You want me to knight you? Why? Is this wish difficult? The red-haired girl stood up from the gravel beach and asked in confusion, her tattered clothes fluttering slightly with the wind blowing from the empty lake. Viserys was silent for a moment, then shook his head. No, it's not difficult to knight you, but Viserys didn't know how to explain to her. There were actually very few female knights in the world, and he felt that she underestimated the promise he made. She could become a wealthy businessman who could rival a country, and could become a feudal lord of a place. However, she just wanted to be a knight. There are many types of knights, and it's just a threshold for commoners to become nobles. She could have ascended to heaven and become a noble directly. There are very few women in this world who can become knights, because knights mean responsibility, obligation, honor and fighting. Who are the female knights since ancient times? The first thing Viserys thought of was the disobedient Diana Targaryen. Is the beauty of Tarth a knight? No, that's not right. She doesn't seem to be. She is just good at wielding swords and guns. Viserys opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the girl. I heard people from Westeros say that knights are spirits rather than swords. And I think spirits should not be distinguished by whether or not there is that thing. Maya spoke decisively, looking at Viserys with a sharp gaze. The girl was generous and generous, which made Viserys' face a little embarrassed. You are right. Then the silver-haired young man was silent for a moment, and finally nodded. I can make you a knight, Ma. However, Viserys had not finished speaking. But have you really thought it through? You will give up the lofty title, fiefdom, and gold. Of course. Maya nodded solemnly. She didn't want those things that everyone seemed to covet. Everyone in this world has their own choices, and everyone has their own stories and experiences. If everyone is the same, wouldn't it be too boring? Clang, but the next second, Viserys drew out the Valyrian steel sword he used to kill the dragon with his own hands. The gilded crossguard in the smooth sword body reflected the cold light in the morning sun. "Kneel before me, lady," Viserys said calmly, and his handsome face rarely became so serious. The red-haired girl was slightly stunned, but then she reacted, gently bent her knees, and knelt on one knee in front of Viserys. There were scars left on her body and legs from the battle. Viserys held the heavy Valyrian steel sword and gently placed it on the girl's stubborn shoulders. "Maya from Volantis, are you willing to swear before the gods and the world? Guard the weak, protect women and children. Obey the superiors, the lords and the king. No matter how difficult, humble, or dangerous the future is, always fight bravely and live up to the mission." Viserys' voice was calm, and he spoke word by word. The girl who knelt on one knee in front of Viserys, felt the long sword on her shoulder, looked up at Viserys' eyes, and then said solemnly, "I do." Meeting Viserys was the biggest turning point in the girl's life. She explored the deepest part of the Valyrian ruins, rode a dragon, and witnessed a dragon fight, and accepted Viserys' personal canonization from an ordinary mercenary to a noble knight. However, Viserys' canonization was not over yet. He replaced the Valyrian steel sword on the girl's shoulder with his left shoulder, looked at the female knight kneeling in front of him with a sharp gaze, and then spoke abruptly. "Sir Maya, will you be my king's good? From now on, I will not marry, give birth to land, or have children until I die. I will not wear a crown, or compete for honors. I will be loyal to my duty, and live and die here." Viserys' voice was word by word, floating on the silent lake. The newly appointed female knight was without armor, and covered with scars. She knelt on one knee in front of him, but her back was straight. A closer look revealed that the girl's shoulders were slightly swaying, and her eyes were slightly red. "I do, your majesty. I will be a sharp sword under the light and a strong shield to protect the kingdom." Then Viserys lifted the Valyrian steel sword that was pressing on the girl's shoulder, and slowly put it back into the scabbard. "Get up, Sir Maya, my second white knight. When we return to Pentus, I will introduce you to your captain." The girl seemed a little excited. Fortune and misfortune are interdependent. Her fate was changed at this moment. Now no one knows whether it is worth it for her to give up the gold, title and other coveted rewards in exchange for a position in the king's good beside Viserys. Maya couldn't help but burst into tears. Viserys put away the Valyrian steel sword and weighed the weight of the sword in his hand. The black scabbard was plain and unadorned, and it was impossible to tell that there was a peerless weapon hidden in the scabbard. A good knight cannot be without a qualified weapon. Viserys glanced at her and said, then he threw the sword to the newly appointed female knight. "This sword is for you." The female knight who had just become a member of Viserys' Kingsguard was still a little at a loss. Snap, she reached out and caught the sword thrown by Viserys. "Your Majesty, this sword is too precious," Maya said in a hurried tone. She knew that this was a precious Valyrian steel sword, and she had killed a dragon with her own hands. How could Viserys just give it to her casually? "You are my Kingsguard, and I give it to you to better protect myself. Don't worry about it, take it." Viserys looked at her and said calmly, "All Valyrian steel swords in the world have their own names. The name of this sword is no longer known. You can give it a new name. For example, Dragon Slayer." "Oh no, sword." Viserys made a joke that only he could understand. Although Maya did not understand Viserys' joke, she also understood what he meant. The female knight immediately knelt on one knee, holding the extremely precious Valyrian steel sword in her hand and spoke. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the sword. I will dedicate my life and honor to the Kingsguard." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.